Chapter 1. The Theatrical Outfitters. The deck creaked and shifted beneath his feet. The sailcloth flapped gently. Seabirds crowed and called in the salty air above. "I never thought to see such a thing," muttered Logen. The city was a huge white crescent, stretching all round the wide blue bay, sprawling across many bridges, tiny in the distance, and onto rocky islands in the sea. Here and there, green parks stood out from the confusion of buildings. The thin grey lines of rivers and canals shone in the sun. There were walls, too, studded with towers, skirting the distant edge of the city, and striking boldly through the jumble of houses. Logen's jaw hung stupidly open. His eyes darted here and there, unable to take in the whole. "Adua," murmured Bayaz, "the center of the world. The poets call her the city of white towers. Beautiful, isn't she, from a distance?" The Magus leaned towards him. "Believe me, though, she stinks when you get close." A vast fortress rose up from within the city, its sheer white walls towering above the carpet of buildings outside, bright sunlight glinting on shining domes within. Logen had never dreamed of a man-made thing so great, so proud, so strong. One tower in particular rose high over all the others, a tapering cluster of smooth, dark pillars, seeming to support the very sky. "And Bethod means to make war on this?" he whispered. "He must be mad, perhaps." "Bethod, for all his waste and pride, understands the union." Bayaz nodded towards the city. "They are jealous of one another, all those people. It may be a union in name, but they fight each other tooth and nail. The lowly squabble over trifles. The great wage secret wars for power and wealth, and they call it government. Wars of words and tricks and guile, but no less bloody for that. The casualties are many." The Magus sighed. "Behind those walls they shout and argue and endlessly bite one another's backs. Old squabbles are never settled, but thrive and put down roots, and the roots grow deeper with the passing years. It has always been so. They are not like you, Logen. A man here can smile and fawn and call you friend, give you gifts with one hand and stab you with the other. You will find this a strange place." Logen already found it the strangest thing he had ever seen. There was no end to it. As their boat slipped into the bay, the city seemed to grow more vast than ever, a forest of white buildings, speckled with dark windows, embracing them on all sides, covering the hills and roofs and towers, crowding together, walls squashed to wall, pressing up against the water on the shoreline. Ships and boats of all designs vied with each other in the bay, sails billowing, crewmen crying out over the noise of the spray, hurrying about the decks and crawling through the rigging. Some were smaller even than her own little two-sailed boat. Some were far larger. Logen gawped, amazed, as a huge vessel plowed through the water towards them, shining spray flying from its prow. A mountain of wood floating by some magic in the sea. The ship passed, leaving them rocking in its wake, but there were more, many more, tethered to the countless wharves along the shore. Logen, shielding his eyes against the bright sun with one hand, began to make out people on the sprawling docks. He began to hear them too, a faint din of voices crying, and carts rattling, and cargoes clattering to the ground. There were hundreds of tiny figures, swarming among the ships and buildings like black ants. "How many live here?" he whispered. "Thousands," Bayaz shrugged. "Hundreds of thousands. People from every land within the circle of the world. There are Northmen here, and dark-skinned Kantiks from Gurkul and beyond. People from the old empire, far to the west, and merchants of the free cities of Styria. Others, too, from still further away, the Thousand Islands, distant Suljak and Thond, where they worship the sun. More people than can be counted living, dying, working, breeding, climbing one upon the other. Welcome." And Bayaz spread his arms wide to encompass the monstrous, the beautiful, the endless city, to civilization. Hundreds of thousands. Logen struggled to understand it. Hundreds of thousands. Could there be so many people in the world? He stared at the city, all around him, wondering, rubbing his aching eyes. What might 100,000 people look like? An hour later, he knew. Only in battle had Logen ever been so squashed, hemmed, pressed by other people. It was like a battle, here on the docks, the cries, the anger, the crush, the fear and confusion. A battle in which no mercy was shown, and which had no end and no winners. Logen was used to the open sky, the air around him, his own company. On the road, when Bayaz and Quay had ridden close beside him, he'd felt squeezed. Now there were people on every side, pushing, jostling, shouting. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Hundreds of thousands. Could they really all be people? People like him with thoughts and moods and dreams? Faces loomed up and flashed by surly, anxious frowning, gone a sickening whirl of color. Logen swallowed, blinked. His throat was painfully dry. His head span. Surely this was hell. He knew he deserved to be here, but he didn't remember dying. "Malachus," he hissed desperately. The apprentice looked around. "Stop a moment." Logen pulled at his collar, trying to let some air in. "I can't breathe." Quay grinned. It might just be the smell. It might at that. The docks smelled like hell, and no mistake. The reek of stinking fish, sickly spices, rotting fruit, fresh dung, sweating horses and mules and people, mingled and bred under the hot sun and became worse by far than anyone alone. "Move!" A shoulder knocked Logen roughly aside and was gone. He leaned against a grimy wall and wiped sweat from his face. Bayaz was smiling. Not like the wide and barren north, eh, Ninefingers? No. Logen watched the people milling past the horses, the carts, the endless faces. A man stared suspiciously at him as he passed. A boy pointed at him and shouted something. A woman with a basket gave him a wide berth, staring fearfully up as she hurried by. Now he had a moment to think. They were all looking and pointing and staring, and they didn't look happy. Logen leaned down to Malachus. "I am feared and hated throughout the north. I don't like it, but I know why." A sullen group of sailors stared at him with hard eyes, muttering to each other under their breath. He watched them, puzzled, until they disappeared behind a rumbling wagon. "Why do they hate me here?" "Bethod has moved quickly," muttered Bayaz, frowning out at the crowds. "His war with the Union has already begun. We will not find the North too popular in Adua, I fear." "How do they know where I am from?" Malachus raised an eyebrow. "You stick out somewhat." Logen flinched as a pair of laughing youths flashed by him. "I do among all this, only like a huge, scarred, dirty gatepost." He looked down at himself. "I see." Away from the docks the crowds grew sparser, the air cleaner, the noise faded. It was still teeming, stinking and noisy, but at least Logen could take a breath. They passed across wide paved squares, decorated with plants and statues, where brightly painted wooden signs hung over doors: blue fish, pink pigs, purple bunches of grapes, brown loaves of bread. There were tables and chairs out in the sun where people sat and ate from flat pots, drank from green glass cups. They threaded through narrow alleys, where rickety-looking wood and plaster buildings leaned out over them, almost meeting above their heads, leaving only a thin strip of blue sky between. They wandered down wide, cobbled roads, busy with people and lined with monstrous white buildings. Logen blinked and gaped at all of it. On no moor, however foggy, in no forest, however dense, had Logen ever felt so completely lost. He had no idea now in what direction the boat was, though they'd left it no more than half an hour ago. The sun was hidden behind the towering buildings and everything looked the same. He was terrified he'd lose track of Bayaz and Quay in the crowds and be lost forever. He hurried after the back of the wizard's bald head, following him into an open space. A great road, bigger than any they'd seen so far, bounded on either side by white palaces behind high walls and fences, lined with ancient trees. The people here were different. Their clothes were bright and gaudy, cut in strange styles that served no purpose. The women hardly seemed like people at all, pale and bony, swaddled in shining fabric, flapping at themselves in the hot sun with pieces of cloth stretched over sticks. "Where are we?" he shouted at Bayaz. If the wizard had answered that they were on the moon, Logen would not have been surprised. "This is the Middle Way, one of the city's main thoroughfares. It cuts through the very center of the city to the Agrient." "Agrient," Fortress, palace, barracks, seat of government. A city within the city. The heart of the Union. That's where we're going. We are. A group of sour young men stared suspiciously at Logen as he passed them. Will let us in? Oh, yes, but they won't like it. Logen struggled on through the crowds. Everywhere the sun twinkled on the panes of glass windows, hundreds of them. Carleon had a few glass windows in the grandest buildings, at least before they'd sacked the city. Precious few afterwards, it had to be admitted. Precious little of anything. The dogman had loved the sound the glass made as it broke. He'd prodded at the windows with a spear, a great big smile on his face, delighted by the crash and tinkle. That had hardly been the worst of it. Beathod had given the city to his carles for 3 days. That was his custom, and they loved him for it. Logen had lost his finger in the battle the day before, and they'd closed the wound with hot iron. It throbbed, and the pain had made him savage, as though he'd needed an excuse for violence back then. He remembered the stink of blood and sweat and smoke, the sounds of screaming and crashing and laughter. Please, Logen tripped, nearly fell. There was something clinging to his leg, a woman sitting on the ground beside a wall. Her clothes were dirty, ragged, her face was pale, pinched with hunger. She had something in her arms, a bundle of rags, a child. Please, nothing else. The people laughed and chattered and surged around them, just as if they weren't there. Please, I don't have anything, he muttered. No more than 5 strides away, a man in a tall hat sat at a table and chuckled with a friend as he tucked into a steaming plate of meat and vegetables. Logen blinked at the plate of food, at the starving woman. Logen, come on! Bayaz had taken him by the elbow and was drawing him away. But shouldn't we? Haven't you noticed? They're everywhere. The king needs money, so he squeezes the nobles. The nobles squeeze their tenants. The tenants squeeze the peasants. Some of them, the old, the weak, the extra sons and daughters, they get squeezed right out the bottom. Too many mouths to feed. The lucky ones make thieves or whores. The rest end up begging. But clear the road. Logen stumbled to the wall and pressed himself against it, Malachus and Bayaz beside him. The crowds parted, and a long column of men tramped by, shepherded by armored guards. Some were young, mere boys. Some were very old. All were dirty and ragged, and few of them looked healthy. A couple were clearly lame, hobbling along as best they could. One near the front had only one arm. A passer-by in a fabulous crimson jacket held a square of cloth over his wrinkled nose as the beggars shuffled past. What are these? Logen whispered to Bayaz. Lawbreakers, the magus chuckled. Soldiers. Logen stared at them, filthy, coughing, limping, some without boots. Soldiers? These? Oh yes, they go to fight Beathod. Logen rubbed at his temples. A clan once sent their poorest warrior, a man called Forley the weakest, to fight me in a duel. They meant it, by way of surrender. Why does this union send their weakest? Logen shook his head grimly. They won't beat Beathod with such as these. They will send others. Bayaz pointed out another, smaller gathering. Those are soldiers too. Those? A group of tall youths, dressed in gaudy suits of red or bright green cloth, a couple with outsize hats. They were at least wearing swords of a kind, but they hardly looked like fighting men. Fighting women, maybe. Logen frowned, staring from one group to the other. The dirty beggars, the gaudy lads. It was hard for him to say which were the stranger. A tiny bell jingled as the door opened, and Logen followed Bayaz through the low archway, Malachus behind him. The shop was dim after the bright street, and it took Logen's eyes a moment to adjust. Leaning against a wall were sheets of wood, childishly daubed with pictures of buildings, forests, mountains. Strange clothes were draped over stands beside them, flowing robes, lurid gowns, suits of armor, enormous hats and helmets, rings and jewelry, even a heavy crown. Weapons occupied a small rack, swords and spears richly decorated. Logen stepped closer, frowning. They were fakes. Nothing was real. The weapons were painted wood. The crown was made of flaking tin. The jewels were colored glass. What is this place? Bayaz was casting an eye over the robes by the wall. A theatrical outfitter's. A what? The people of this city love spectacle. Comedy, drama, theater of all kinds. This shop provides equipment for the mounting of plays, stories, lodged and poked at a wooden sword. Some people have too much time on their hands. A small, plump man emerged from a door at the back of the shop, looking Bayaz, Malachus, and Logen over suspiciously. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "Of course." Bayaz stepped forward, switching effortlessly to the common tongue. "We are mounting a production and require some costumes. We understand you are the foremost theatrical outfitters in all of Adua." The shopkeeper smiled nervously, taking in their grimy faces and travel-stained clothes. True, but quality is expensive, gentlemen. Money is no object." Bayaz took out a bulging purse and tossed it absently on the counter. It sagged open, heavy golden coins scattering across the wood. The shopkeeper's eyes lit with an inner fire. "Of course. What precisely did you have in mind?" "I need a magnificent robe suitable for a magus or a great sorcerer or some such. Something of the arcane about it, certainly. Then we'll have something similar, if less impressive, for an apprentice. Finally, we need something for a mighty warrior. A prince of the distant north. Something with fur, I imagine. Those should be straightforward. I will see what we have." The shopkeeper disappeared through the door behind the counter. "What is all this shit?" asked Logen. "People are born to their station here. They have commoners to fight and farm the land and do the work. They have gentry to trade and build and do the thinking. They have nobility to own the land and push the others around. They have royalty." Bayaz glanced at the tin crown. "I forget exactly why. In the north you can rise as high as your merits will take you. Only look at our mutual friend, Bethod. Not so here. A man is born in his place and is expected to stay there. We must seem to be from a high place indeed, if we are to be taken seriously. Dressed as we are, we wouldn't get past the gates of the Agrient." The shopkeeper interrupted him by reappearing through the door, his arms heaped with bright cloth. "One mystical robe, suitable for the most powerful of wizards, used last year for adjuvants in a production of the End of the Empire, during the Spring Festival. It is, if I may say so, some of my best work." Bayaz held the shimmering swathe of crimson cloth up to the faint light, gazing at it admiringly. Arcane diagrams, mystical lettering and symbols of sun, moon, and stars, glittered in silver thread. Malachus ran a hand over the shining cloth of his own absurd garment. "I don't think you'd have laughed me off so quickly, eh, Logen, if I'd arrived at your campfire dressed in this?" Logen winced. "I reckon I might have. And here we have a splendid piece of barbarian garb." The shopkeeper hefted a black leather tunic onto the counter, set with swirls of shiny brass, trimmed with pointless tissues of delicate chainmail. He pointed at the matching fur cloak. "This is real sable." It was a ludicrous piece of clothing, equally useless for warmth or protection. Logen folded his arms across his old coat. "You think I'm going to wear that?" The shopkeeper swallowed nervously. "You must forgive my friend," said Bayaz. "He is an actor after the new fashion. He believes in losing himself entirely in his role." "Is that so?" squeaked the man, looking Logen up and down. "Northmen are, I suppose, topical, absolutely. I do declare, Master Ninefingers is the very best at what he does." The old wizard nudged Logen in the ribs. "The very best. I have seen it, if you say so." The shopkeeper looked far from convinced. "Might I inquire what you will be staging?" "Oh, it's a new piece." Bayaz tapped the side of his bald head with a finger. "I am still working on the details." "Really?" "Indeed. More a scene than an entire play." He glanced back at the robe, admiring the way the light glittered on the arcane symbols. "A scene in which Bayaz, the first of the Magi, finally takes up his seat on the closed council." "Ah," the shopkeeper nodded knowingly. "A political piece, a biting satire, perhaps. Will it be comic or dramatic in tone?" Bayaz glanced sidelong at Logen. "That remains to be seen." Chapter 2. Barbarians at the gate. Jezal flashed along the lane beside the moat, feet pounding on the worn cobblestones, the great white wall sliding endlessly by on his right, one tower after another, as he made his daily circuit of the Agriant. Since he had cut down on the drinking, the improvement in his stamina had been impressive. He was scarcely even out of breath. It was early, and the streets of the city were nearly empty. The odd person would look up at him as he ran by, maybe even call out some word of encouragement, but Jezal barely noticed them. His eyes were fixed on the sparkling lapping water in the moat, and his mind was elsewhere. Arde. Where else was it ever? He had supposed, after that day when West had warned him off, after he had stopped seeing her, that his thoughts would soon return to other matters and other women. He had applied himself to his fencing with a will, attempted to show an interest in his duties as an officer, but he found himself unable to concentrate, and other women seemed now pale, flat, tedious creatures. The long runs, the monotonous exercises with bar and beam, gave his mind ample opportunity to wander. The tedium of peacetime soldiering was even worse. Reading boring papers, standing guard on things that needed no guarding. His attention would inevitably slip, and then she would be there. R.D., in wholesome peasant garb, flushed and sweaty from hard work in the fields. R.D. in the finery of a princess, glittering with jewels. R.D. bathing in forest pools, while he watched from the bushes. R.D. proper and demure, glancing shyly up at him from beneath her lashes. R.D. a whore by the docks, beckoning to him from a grimy doorway. The fantasies were infinite in variety, but they all ended the same way. His hour-long circuit of the Agriant was complete, and he thumped across the bridge and back in through the south gate. Jezal treated the guards to their daily share of indifference, trotted through the tunnel and up the long ramp into the fortress, then turned towards the courtyard where Marshal Varuz would be waiting. All the while, R.D. was rubbing up against the back of his mind. It was hardly as though he had nothing else to think about. The contest was close now, very close. Soon he would fight before the cheering crowds, his family and friends among them. It might make his reputation, or sink it. He should have been lying awake at night, tense and sweating, worrying endlessly about forms and training and steels. And yet somehow that wasn't what he thought about in bed. Then there was a war on. It was easy to forget here in the sunny lanes of the Agriant that England had been invaded by hordes of slavering barbarians. He would be going north soon to lead his company in battle. There, surely, was a thought to keep a man occupied. Was not war a deadly business? He could be hurt, or scarred, or killed even. Jezal tried to conjure up the twisting, twitching, painted face of Fenris the Feared, legions of screaming savages descending upon the Agriant. It was a terrible business, all right, a dangerous and frightening business. Arde came from England. What if, say, she were to fall into the hands of the Northmen? Jezal would rush to her rescue, of course. She would not be hurt, well, not badly. Perhaps her clothes a little torn, like so. No doubt she would be frightened, grateful. He would be obliged to comfort her, of course. She might even faint. He might have to carry her, her head pressed against his shoulder. He might have to lay her down and loosen her clothes. Their lips might touch, just brush gently. Hers might part a little then. Jezal stumbled in the road. There was a pleasant swelling building in his crotch. Pleasant, but hardly compatible with a brisk run. He was nearly at the courtyard now, and this would never do at fencing practice. He glanced desperately around for a distraction, and nearly choked on his tongue. Major West was standing by the wall, dressed to fence and watching him approach with an unusually grim expression. For an instant, Jezal wondered if his friend might be able to tell what he had been thinking. He swallowed guiltily, felt the blood rushing to his face. West couldn't know he couldn't, but he was most unhappy about something. Luthar, he grunted. West. Jezal stared down at his shoes. They had not been getting on too well since West joined Lord Marshal Burr's staff. Jezal tried to be happy for him, but could not escape the feeling that he was better qualified for the post. He had excellent blood after all, whether he had experience in the field or not. Then Arde was still lurking between them, that unpleasant and needless warning. Everyone knew that West had been first through the breach at Orioch. Everyone knew that he had the devil of a temper. That had always seemed exciting to Jezal, until he got on the wrong end of it. Varuz is waiting. West unfolded his arms and strode off towards the archway. And he is not alone. Not alone. The Marshal feels you need to get used to an audience. Jezal frowned. I'm surprised anyone cares in the present climate. What with the war and all, you'd be surprised. Fighting and fencing and all things martial are very much the flavor. Everyone's wearing a sword these days, even if they've never drawn one in their lives. There's an absolute fever about the contest. Believe me. Jezal blinked as they passed into the bright courtyard. A stand of temporary seating had been hastily erected along one wall, packed from one end to the other with people, 70 or more. "And here he is," shouted Marshal Varus. There was a ripple of polite applause. Jezal felt himself grinning. There were some very important people in amongst the crowd. He spotted Morovia, the Lord High Justice, stroking his long beard. Laodicea was not far away from him, looking slightly bored. Crown Prince Ladisla himself was lounging on the front row, shining in a shirt of gossamer chainmail and clapping enthusiastically. The people on the benches behind had to lean over to see round the waving plume on his magnificent hat. Varus handed Jezal his steels, still beaming. "Don't you dare make me look a fool," he hissed. Jezal coughed nervously, looking up at the rows of expectant people. His heart sank. Inquisitor Glokta's toothless grin leered at him from the crowd. And on the row behind him, Ardy West. She was wearing an expression that she never had in his daydreams. 1/3 sullen, 1/3 accusing, 1/3 simply bored. He glanced away, staring toward the opposite wall, inwardly cursing his own cowardice. He seemed unable to meet anyone's eye these days. This bout would be fought with half-edged steels, thundered the Lord Marshal. The best of 3 touches. West already had his swords drawn and was making his way to the circle, marked out with white chalk in the carefully shaved grass. Jezal's heart was hammering loud as he fumbled his own steels out of their sheaths, acutely aware of all those eyes upon him. He took his mark opposite West, pushing his feet cautiously into the grass. West raised his steels. Jezal did the same. They faced each other for a moment, motionless. "Begin," shouted Varus. It quickly became clear that West had no mind to roll over for him. He came on with more than his usual ferocity, harrying Jezal with a flurry of heavy cuts, their steels clashing and scraping rapidly together. He gave ground, still uncomfortable under the watchful eyes of all those people. Damned important people, some of them. But as West pushed him back towards the edge of the circle, his nerves began to fade. His training took over. He ducked away, making room for himself, parrying the cuts with left and right, dodging and dancing, too fast to catch. The people faded. Even RD was gone. The blades moved by themselves, back and forth, up and down. There was no need for him to look at them. He turned his attention to West's eyes, watched them flicker from the ground to the steels, to Jezal's dancing feet, trying to guess his intentions. He felt the lunge coming even before it was begun. He feinted one way, then turned the other, slipping smoothly round behind West as he blundered past. It was a simple matter for him to apply his foot to the seat of his opponent's trousers and shove him out of the circle. "A touch!" shouted Marshal Varus. There was a ripple of laughter as the major sprawled on his face. "A touch on the arse," guffawed the Crown Prince, his plume waving back and forth with merriment. "One to Captain Luthar." West didn't look half so intimidating with his face in the dirt. Jezal gave a little bow to the audience, risked a smile in Ardy's direction as he rose. He was disappointed to see she wasn't even looking at him. She was watching her brother struggle in the dust with a faint, cruel grin. West got slowly to his feet. "A good touch," he muttered through gritted teeth as he stepped back into the circle. Jezal took his own mark, barely able to suppress his smile. "Begin," shouted Varus. West came on strongly again, but Jezal was warming to his task now. The sounds of the audience muttered and swelled as he danced this way and that. He began to work the odd flourish into his movements, and the onlookers responded. Oohs and ahs floating up as he flicked West's efforts away. He had never fenced so well, never moved so smoothly. The bigger man was starting to tire a little. The snap was going out of his cuts. Their long steels clashed together, scraped. Jezal twisted his right wrist and tore West's blade from his fingers, stepped in and slashed at him with his left. Gah! West winced and dropped his short steel, hopping away and grabbing his forearm. A few drops of blood pattered across the ground. 2-0, shouted Varus. The Crown Prince jumped up, his hat tumbling off, delighted by the sight of blood. Excellent, he squawked. Capital! Others joined him on their feet, clapping loudly. Jezal basked in their approval, smiling wide, every muscle tingling with happiness. He understood now what he had been training for. "Well fought, Jezal," muttered West, a trickle of blood running down his forearm. "You've got too good for me. Sorry about the cut." Jezal grinned. He wasn't sorry in the least. "It's nothing. Just a scratch." West strode away, frowning and holding his wrist. Nobody paid much attention to his exit. Jezal least of all. Sporting events are all about the winners. Lord Morovia was the first to get up from the benches and offer his congratulations. "What a promising young man," he said, smiling warmly at Jezal. "But do you think he can beat Bremer Dan Gorst?" Varus gave Jezal a fatherly clap on the shoulder. "I'm sure he can beat anyone, on the right day. Have you seen Gorst fence?" "No, though I hear he is most impressive." The High Justice raised his bushy eyebrows. "I look forward to seeing them meet. Have you ever considered a career in the law, Captain Luthar?" Jezal was taken by surprise. No, your worship, that is. I'm a soldier, of course you are. But battles and so forth can play hell with the nerves. If you should ever change your mind, perhaps I might have a place for you. I can always find a use for promising men." Thank you. Until the contest, then." "Good luck, Captain," he threw over his shoulder as he shuffled away. The implication was that he thought Jezal would need a great deal of it. His Highness Prince Ladisla was more optimistic. "You're my man, Luthar," he shouted, poking the air with his fingers as though they were fencing steels. "I'm going to double my bet on you." Jezal bowed obsequiously. "Your Highness is too kind. You're my man. A soldier." "A fencing man should fight for his country, eh, Varus? Why isn't this Gorst a soldier?" "I believe he is, your Highness," said the Lord Marshal gently. "He is a kinsman of Lord Brock, and serves with his personal guard." "Oh," the prince seemed confused for a moment, but soon perked up. "But you're my man?" he shouted at Jezal, poking once more with his fingers, the feather on his hat waving this way and that. "You're the man for me." He danced off towards the archway, decorative chainmail gleaming. "Very impressive." Jezal whipped round, took an ungainly step back, Glokta leering at him from his blind side. For a cripple, he had an uncanny knack of sneaking up on a man. "What a happy chance for everyone that you didn't give it up after all." "I never had any intention of doing so," snapped Jezal frostily. Glokta sucked at his gums. "If you say so, Captain." "I do." Jezal turned rudely away, hoping that he never had occasion to speak to the loathsome man again. He found himself staring straight into Ardy's face, no more than a foot away. "Gah!" he stammered, stepping back again. "Jezal," she said, "I haven't seen you in a while. He glanced nervously around. Glokta was shambling away. West was long gone. Varus was busy holding forth to Lord Isher and a few others still remaining in the courtyard. They were unobserved. He had to speak to her. He ought to tell her straight out that he could not see her any more. He owed her that much. Nothing to say to me?" He turned swiftly on his heel and walked away, his shoulders prickling with shame. The tedium of guard duty at the south gate seemed, after all that unexpected excitement, almost a mercy. Jezal was quite looking forward to standing idly by, watching people file in and out of the agrient, listening to Lieutenant Kaspa's mindless babble. At least he was until he got there. Kaspa and the usual complement of armored soldiers were clustered around the outer gates, where the old bridge across the moat passed between the two massive white-rendered towers of the gatehouse. As Jezal marched down to the end of the long tunnel, he saw that there was someone with them. A small, harassed-looking fellow wearing spectacles. Jezal recognized him vaguely. Morrow he was called, some crony of the Lord Chamberlain. He had no reason to be here, Captain Luthar. What a happy chance. Jezal jumped. It was that lunatic, Sulphur, sitting cross-legged on the ground behind him, his back against the sheer wall of the gatehouse. "What the hell's he doing here?" snapped Jezal. Kaspa opened his mouth to speak, but Sulphur got in first. "Don't mind me, Captain. I'm simply waiting for my master." "Your master?" He dreaded to think what manner of an idiot this idiot might serve. "Indeed, he should be here very shortly." Sulphur frowned up at the sun. "He is already somewhat tardy, if the truth be told." "Really?" "Yes." The madman broke into a friendly smile once more. But he'll be along, Jezal, you can depend on it. First-name terms was too much to take. He hardly knew the man, and what he knew he didn't like. He opened his mouth to give him a piece of his mind, but Sulphur suddenly jumped up, grabbing his stick from the wall and brushing himself down. "Here they are," he said, looking out across the moat. Jezal followed the idiot's eyes with his own. A magnificent old man was striding purposefully across the bridge, bald head held high, a fabulous gown of shimmering red and silver flowing about him in the breeze. At his heels came a sickly-looking youth, head a little bowed as if in awe of the older man, holding a long staff out before him in upturned palms. A great brute of a man in a heavy fur cloak followed behind them, a good half-head taller than the other two. What the... Jezal trailed off. He seemed to recognize the old man from somewhere. Some lord perhaps from the open council? Some foreign ambassador? Certainly he had an air of majesty. Jezal racked his brains as they approached, but could not place him. The old man stopped before the gatehouse, swept Jezal, Kaspa, Morrow, and the guards imperiously with glittering green eyes. "You're," he said. Sulphur stepped forward, bowing low. "Master Beas," he murmured, in hushed tones of deep respect. And that was it. That was why Jezal knew the man. He bore a definite resemblance to the statue of Beas in the Kingsway. The statue Jezal had run past so many times. A little fatter, perhaps, but that expression. Stern, wise, effortlessly commanding, was just the same. Jezal frowned. For the old man to be called by that name? He didn't like it. He didn't like the look of the lanky young man with the staff either. He liked the look of the old man's other companion even less. West had often told Jezal that the Northmen found in Adua, usually skulking disheveled by the docks or dirty drunk in gutters, were by no means typical of their people. Those that lived free in the far north, fighting, feuding, feasting, and doing whatever Northmen did, were of quite a different kind. A tall, fierce, handsome people, Jezal had always imagined, with a touch of romance about them. Strong, yet graceful. Wild, yet noble. Savage, yet cunning. The kind of men whose eyes are fixed always on the far horizon. This was not one of those. Never in his life had Jezal seen a more brutish-looking man. Even Fenris the Feared had seemed civilized by comparison. His face was like a whipped back, crisscrossed with ragged scars. His nose was bent, pointing off a little sideways. One ear had a big notch out of it. One eye seemed a touch higher than the other, surrounded by a crescent-shaped wound. His whole face, in fact, was slightly beaten, broken, lopsided, like that of a prize fighter who has fought a few bouts too many. His expression, too, was that of one punch-drunk. He gawped up at the gatehouse, forehead furrowed, mouth hanging open, staring about him with a look of near-animal stupidity. He wore a long fur cloak and a leather tunic set with gold, but this height of barbaric splendor only made him look more savage, and there was no missing the long, heavy sword at his belt. The Northman scratched at a big pink scar through the stubble on his cheek as he peered up at the sheer walls above, and Jezal noticed one of his fingers was missing, as though any further evidence of a life of violence and savagery was necessary to let this hulking primitive into the Agrient, while they were at war with the Northmen. It was unthinkable, but Morrow was already sidling forward. "The Lord Chamberlain is expecting you, gentlemen," he gushed as he bowed and scraped his way towards the old man. "If you would care to follow me, one moment." Jezal grabbed the undersecretary by the elbow and pulled him aside. "Him too?" he asked incredulously, nodding over at the primitive in the cloak. "We are at war, you know. Lord Hoff was most specific." Morrow shook his arm free, spectacles flashing. "Keep him here if you wish, but you can explain it to the Lord Chamberlain." Jezal swallowed. That idea was not at all appealing. He glanced up at the old man, but could not look him in the eye for long. He had a mysterious air, an air of knowing something no one else could guess, and it was most unsettling. "You must leave your weapons here," he shouted, speaking as slowly and clearly as possible. "Happy to." The Northman pulled the sword from his belt and held it out. It weighed heavily in Jezal's hands, a big, plain, brutal-looking weapon. He followed it with a long knife, then knelt and pulled another from his boot. He took a third from the small of his back, and then produced a thin blade from inside his sleeve, heaping them into Jezal's outstretched arms. The Northman smiled broadly. It was truly a hideous sight, the ragged scars twisting and puckering, making his face more lopsided than ever. "You can never have too many knives," he growled in a deep, grinding voice. Nobody laughed, but he did not seem to care. "Shall we go?" asked the old man. "Without delay," said Morrow, turning to leave. "I'll come with you." Jezal dumped his armload of weapons into Caspa's hands. "That really isn't necessary, Captain," whined Morrow. "I insist." Once he was delivered to the Lord Chamberlain, the Northman could murder whomever he pleased. It would be someone else's problem, but until he got there, Jezal might be blamed for whatever mischief he got up to, and he was damned if he was going to let that happen. The guard stood aside. The strange procession passed through the gate. Morrow was first, whispering obsequious nothings over his shoulder to the old man in the splendid robe. The pale youth was next, followed by Sulphur. The nine-fingered Northman lumbered along at the back. Jezal followed with his thumb in his belt, close to the hilt of his sword so he could get to it quickly, watching the savage intently for any sudden moves. After following him for a short while, though, Jezal had to admit, the man gave no appearance of having murder in mind. If anything, he looked curious, bemused, and somewhat embarrassed. He kept slowing, staring up at the buildings around him, shaking his head, scratching his face, muttering under his breath. He would occasionally horrify passers-by by smiling at them, but he seemed to present no greater threat, and Jezal began to relax, at least until they reached the square of marshals. The Northman stopped suddenly. Jezal fumbled for his sword, but the primitive's eyes were locked ahead, gazing at a fountain nearby. He moved slowly towards it, then cautiously raised a thick finger and poked at the glittering jet. Water splashed into his face and he blundered away, almost knocking Jezal down. "A spring," he whispered. "But how, mercy?" The man was like a child, a 6.5-foot child with a face like a butcher's block. "There are pipes," Jezal stamped on the paving. "Beneath the ground." "Pipes," echoed the primitive quietly, staring at the frothing water. The others had moved some way ahead, close to the grand building in which Hoff had his offices. Jezal began to step away from the fountain, hoping to draw the witless savage with him. To Jezal's relief he followed, shaking his head and muttering pipes to himself over and over. They entered the cool darkness of the Lord Chamberlain's anteroom. There were people seated on the benches around the walls, some of them giving the impression of having been waiting a very long time. They all stared as Morrow ushered the peculiar group straight into Hoff's offices. The spectacled secretary opened the heavy double doors and stood by while first the old bald man, then his crony with the stick, then the madman Sulphur, and finally the nine-fingered primitive walked in past him. Jezal made to follow them, but Morrow stood in the doorway and blocked his path. "Thank you so much for your help, Captain," he said with a thin smile. "You may return to the gate." Jezal peered over his shoulder into the room beyond. He saw the Lord Chamberlain frowning behind a long table. Arch Lector Zult was beside him, grim and suspicious. High Justice Morovia was there too, a smile on his wrinkled face. 3 members of the closed council. Then Morrow shut the door in his face. Chapter 3. Next. "I notice you have a new secretary," said Glokta, as though just in passing. The Arch Lector smiled. "Of course. The old one was not to my liking. He had a loose tongue, you know." Glokta paused, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. He had been passing our secrets onto the Mercers, continued Sult carelessly, as if it was common knowledge. "I had been aware of it for some time. You needn't worry, though. He never learned anything I didn't want him to know. Then, you knew who our traitor was. You knew all along." Glokta's mind turned the events of the last few weeks around, pulled them apart, and put them back together in this new light, trying them different ways until they fit, all the while struggling to conceal his surprise. "You left Rue's confession where you knew your secretary would see it. You knew the Mercers would find out who was on the list, and you guessed what they would do, knowing it would only play into your hands and give you the shovel with which to bury them. Meanwhile, you steered my suspicions towards Colleen. When you knew who the leak was all along, the whole business unfolded precisely according to your plan." The Arch Lector was looking back at him with a knowing smile. "And I bet you guess what I'm thinking right now. I have been almost as much a piece in this game as that sniveling worm of a secretary." Glokta stifled a giggle. "How fortunate for me that I was a piece on the right side. I never suspected a thing. He betrayed us for a disappointingly small sum of money, continued Salt, his lip curling with distaste. I dare say Colt would have given him 10 times as much if he had only had the wit to ask. The younger generation really have no ambition. They think they are a great deal cleverer than they are. He studied Glokta with his cool blue eyes. I am part of the younger generation, more or less. I am justly humbled. Your secretary has been disciplined. The Arch Lector placed his glass carefully down on the tabletop, the base barely making a sound on the wood. Oh yes, most severely. It really isn't necessary to spare him any further thought. I bet it isn't. Body found floating by the docks. I must say, I was greatly surprised when you fixed on Superior Colleen as the source of our leak. The man was from the old guard. A few indulgences to look the other way over trifling matters, of course, but to betray the Inquisition. To sell our secrets to the Mercers? Salt snorted. Never. You allowed your personal dislike for the man to cloud your judgment. He seemed the only possibility, muttered Glokta, but immediately regretted it. Foolish, foolish. The mistake is made. Better just to keep your mouth shut, seemed. The Arch Lector clicked his tongue in profound disapproval. No, Inquisitor. Seemed as not good enough for us. In future we'll have just the facts, if you please. But don't feel too badly about it. I allowed you to follow your instincts, and as things have turned out, your blunder has left our position much the stronger. Colleen has been removed from office, body found floating, and Superior Goyle is on his way from England to assume the role of Superior of Adua. Goyle? Coming here? That bastard? The new Superior of Adua. Glokta could not prevent his lip from curling. The two of you are not the greatest of friends. Glokta. He is a jailer, not an investigator. He is not interested in guilt or innocence. He is not interested in truth. He tortures for the thrill of it. Oh, come now, Glokta. Are you telling me you feel no thrill when your prisoners spill their secrets? When they name the names? When they sign the confession? I take no pleasure in it. I take no pleasure in anything. And yet you do it so very well. In any case, Goyle is coming. And whatever you may think of him, he is one of us, a most capable and trustworthy man, dedicated to the service of Crown and State. He was once a pupil of mine, you know. Really? Really? Yes, he had your job. So there is some future in it after all. The Arch Lector giggled at his own joke. Glokta gave a thin smile of his own. All in all, things have worked out very nicely, and you are to be congratulated on your part in it. A job well done. Well enough done that I am still alive, at least. Salt raised his glass and they drank a joyless toast together, eyeing each other suspiciously over the rims of their glasses. Glokta cleared his throat. Magister Colt mentioned something interesting before his unfortunate demise. Go on. The Mercers had a partner in their schemes. A senior partner, perhaps. A bank. Huh. Turn a merchant over and there's always a banker underneath. I believe they encouraged it. Maybe ordered it so that they could get a good return on their loans. May I begin an investigation, Your Eminence? Which bank? Valentin Balk. The Arch Lector seemed to consider a moment, staring at Glokta through his hard blue eyes. Does he already know about these particular bankers? Does he already know much more than me? What did Colt say? You want traitors, Glokta? Look in the house of questions, no snapped Salt. Those particular bankers are well connected. They are owed too many favors, and without Colt it will be difficult to prove anything. We got what we needed from the Mercers, and I have a more pressing task for you. Glokta looked up. Another task? I was looking forward to interviewing the prisoners we took at the Guildhall, Your Eminence. It may be that... No? The Arch Lector swatted Glokta's words away with his gloved hand. That business could drag on for months. I will have Goyle handle it, he frowned, unless you object. So I plow the field, sow the seed, water the crop, then Goyle reaps the harvest. Some justice. He humbly bowed his head. Of course not, Your Eminence. Good. You are probably aware of the unusual visitors we received yesterday. Visitors? For the past week, Glokta had been in agony with his back. Yesterday he had struggled out of bed to watch that Cretan Luthar fence, but otherwise he had been confined to his tiny room, virtually unable to move. I had noticed, he said simply. Bias. the first of the magi. Glokta gave his thin smile again, but the Arch Lector was not laughing. You're joking, of course. If only. A charlatan, your eminence. What else? But a most extraordinary one. Lucid, reasonable, clever. The deception is elaborate in the extreme. You have spoken with him. I have. He is remarkably convincing. He knows things he shouldn't know. He cannot be simply dismissed. Whoever he is, he has funding, and good sources of information. The Arch Lector frowned deep. He has some renegade brute of a Northman with him. Glokta frowned. A Northman? It hardly seems their style. They strike me as most direct. My very thoughts. A spy for the Emperor, then. The Gurkish, perhaps. The Kantiks love a good intrigue, but they tend to stick to the shadows. These theatricals don't seem to have their mark. I suspect our answer may lie closer to home. The nobles, your eminence? Brock, Isher, Hugin, perhaps? Muse Sult, perhaps? They're annoyed enough. Or there's our old friend, the High Justice. He seemed a little too pleased about it all. He's plotting something, I can tell. The nobles, the High Justice, the Northmen. The Gurkish, it could be any one of them, or none, but why? I don't understand, Arch Lector. If they are simply spies, why go to all this trouble? Surely there are easier ways to get into the Agrient. This is the thing. Salt gave as bitter a grimace as Glokta had ever seen. There is an empty seat on the closed council. There always has been. A pointless tradition, a matter of etiquette, a chair reserved for a mythical figure, in any case dead for hundreds of years. Nobody ever supposed that anyone would come forward to claim it. But he has demanded it. The Arch Lector got to his feet and strode around the table. I know, unthinkable. Some spy, some liar from who knows where, privy to the workings of the very heart of our government. But he has some dusty papers, so it falls to us to discredit him. Can you believe it? Glokta could not. But there hardly seems any purpose to saying so. I've asked for time to investigate, continued Salt. But the closed council will not be put off indefinitely. We have only a week or two to expose this so-called magus for the fraud he is. In the meantime, he and his companions are making themselves at home in an excellent suite of rooms in the Tower of Chains, and there is nothing we can do to prevent them wandering the Agrient, causing whatever mischief they please. There is something we could do. The Tower of Chains is very high. If somebody were to fall, no, not yet. We have already pushed our luck as far as it will go in certain circles. For the time being, at least, we must tread carefully. There is always the possibility of an interrogation. If we were to arrest them, I could soon find out who they are working for. Tread carefully, I said. I want you to look into this magus Glokta and his companions. Find out who they are, where they come from, what they are after. Above all, find out who is behind them and why. We must discredit this would-be Bayaz before he can do any damage. After that, you can use whatever means you please. Salt turned and moved away to the window. Glokta got up awkwardly, painfully from his chair. How shall I begin? Follow them, shouted the Arch Lector impatiently. Watch them! See who they speak to, what they are about. You're the Inquisitor, Glokta. He snapped, without even looking round. Ask some questions. Chapter 4, Better Than Death. We're looking for a woman, said the officer, staring at them suspiciously. An escaped slave, a killer. Very dangerous. A woman, master? Asked Yulwai, his brow wrinkled with confusion. Dangerous, master? Yes, a woman. The officer waved his hand impatiently. Tall, with a scar, hair cropped short. Well armed, most likely with a bow. Pharaoh stood there, tall and scarred, hair cropped short, bow over her shoulder, and looked down at the dusty ground. She's wanted by the highest of authorities, a thief and a murderer, many times over. Yulwei gave a humble smile and spread his hands. We have seen no such person, master. I and my son are unarmed, as you can see. Pharaoh looked down uncomfortably at the curved blade of the sword, stuck through her belt, shining in the bright sun. The officer didn't seem to notice, though. He swatted at a fly as Yulwei blathered on. Neither one of us would know what to do with such a thing as a bow, I can assure you. We trust in God to protect us, master, and in the Emperor's matchless soldiers. The officer snorted. Very wise, old man. What's your business here? I am a merchant. on my way to Dagoska to purchase spices, and he gave a groveling bow, with your kind permission. Trading with the Pinks, are you? Damn union! The officer spat in the dust. Still, a man has to make a living, I suppose, if a shameful one. Trade while you can. The Pinks will be gone soon. Swept back into the ocean, he puffed out his chest with pride. The Emperor, Uthman ul-Dasht, has sworn it. What do you think of that, old man? Oh, it will be a great day, said Yue, bowing low again. May God bring it to us soon, master. The officer looked Pharaoh up and down. Your son looks a strong lad. Perhaps he'd make a soldier. He took a step towards her and grabbed hold of her bare arm. That's a strong arm. That arm could draw a bow, I'd say, if it were taught. What do you say, boy? A man's work fighting for the glory of God. And your emperor, better than grubbing for a pittance. Pharaoh's flesh crawled where his fingers touched her skin. Her other hand crept towards her knife. Alas, said Yulwei quickly. My son was born. Simple. He scarcely speaks. Ah, a shame. The time may come when we need every man. Savages they may be, but these Pinks can fight. The officer turned away, and Pharaoh scowled after him. Very well, you may go. He waved them on. The eyes of his soldiers, lounging in the shade of the palms around the road, followed them as they walked past, but without much interest. Pharaoh held her tongue until the encampment had dwindled into the distance behind them. Then she rounded on Yulwei. Dagoska, to begin with, said the old man, staring off across the scrubby plain. And then north, across the Circle Sea to Adua, across the sea. She stopped in the road. I'm not fucking going there. Must you make everything so difficult, Pharaoh? Are you that happy here in Gurkul? These northerners are mad. Everyone knows it. Pinks Union or whatever. Mad, godless. Yulwei raised an eyebrow at her. I didn't know you were so interested in God, Pharaoh. At least I know there is one, she shouted, pointing at the sky. These Pinks, they don't think like us, like real people. We've no business with their kind. I'd rather stay among the Gurkish. Besides, I've scores to settle here. What scores? Going to kill Uthman? She frowned. Perhaps I will. Huh? Yulwei turned and headed off up the road. They're looking for you, Pharaoh, in case you hadn't noticed. You wouldn't get 10 strides without my help. They've still got that cage waiting, remember? The one in front of the palace? They are anxious to fill it. Pharaoh ground her teeth. Uthman is the emperor now. Ul-Dasht, they call him. The mighty, the merciless, greatest emperor for 100 years, they are saying already. Kill the emperor. Yulwei chuckled to himself. You're quite a character, all right. Quite a character. Pharaoh scowled as she followed the old man up the hill. She wasn't looking to be anyone's character. Yulwei could make these soldiers see whatever he pleased. And that was a smart trick, but she'd be damned if she was going north. What business did she have with those godless Pinks? Yulwei was still chuckling away as she drew level with him. Kill the emperor, he shook his head. He'll just have to wait until you get back. You owe me, remember? Pharaoh grabbed him by the sinewy arm. I don't remember you saying anything about crossing the sea. I don't remember your asking, Muljin. And you should be glad you didn't. He peeled her fingers gently away. Your corpse might be drying nicely in the desert, instead of grumbling in my ear, all sleek and healthy. Think on that a while. That shut her up for the time being. She walked along in silence, scowling out across the scrubby landscape, sandals crunching on the dry dirt of the road. She looked sidelong at the old man. He'd saved her life with his tricks. That couldn't be denied. But she'd be damned if she was going north. The fortress was concealed in a rocky cove, but from where they were, high up on the bluff, with the fierce sun behind them, Pharaoh could see the shape of it well enough. A high wall enclosed neat rows of buildings, enough to make a small town. Next to them, built out into the water, were long wharves. Moored to the wharves were ships, huge ships. Towers of wood, floating fortresses. Pharaoh had never seen ships half that size. Their masts were a dark forest against the bright water behind. 10 were docked below them, and further out in the bay 2 more were cutting slowly through the waves. great sails billowing, tiny figures crawling on the decks, and in amongst the spider's web of ropes above. "I see 12, murmured Yue, "but your eyes are the sharper." Pharaoh looked out across the water, further round the curving shore. 20 miles away, perhaps, she could see another fortress, another set of wharves. "There are more over there," she said. 8 or 9, and those ones are bigger. Bigger than these, a lot bigger." "God's breath," muttered Yue to himself. "The Gurkish never built ships so big before, not half so big, nor half so many. There is not the wood in all the south for such a fleet. They must have bought it from the north, from the Styrians, maybe." Pharaoh cared nothing for boats, or wood, or the north. So, with a fleet this size, the Gurkish will be a power at sea. They could take Dagorska from the bay, invade Westport even. The pointless names of faraway places, so? You don't understand, Pharaoh. I must warn the others. We must make haste now. He pushed himself up from the ground and hurried back towards the road. Pharaoh grunted. She watched the big wooden tubs moving back and forth in the bay for a moment longer. Then she got up and followed Yue. Great ships or tiny ships, it meant nothing to her. The Gurkish could take all the pinks in the world for slaves as far as she was concerned. If that meant they left the real people alone. "Out of the way." The soldier spurred his horse right at them, raising his whip. "1,000 pardons, master," whined Yue, groveling to the ground, scuttling off into the grass beside the road, pulling Pharaoh reluctantly by the elbow. She stood in the scrub, watching the column shamble slowly by. Thin figures, ragged, dirty, vacant, hands bound tightly, hollow eyes on the ground. Men and women, all ages, children even. 100 or more. 6 guards rode alongside them, easy in their tall saddles, whips rolled up in their hands. "Slaves," Pharaoh licked her dry lips. "The people of Kadir have risen up," said Yue, frowning at the miserable procession. They wished no longer to be part of the glorious nation of Gurkul, and thought the death of the emperor might be their chance to leave. It seems they were wrong. The new emperor is harder even than the last, Pharaoh. Their rebellion has failed already. It seems your friend Uthman has taken slaves as punishment. Pharaoh watched a scrawny girl limping slowly, bare feet trailing in the dust. 13 years old? It was hard to tell. Her face was dirty and listless. There was a scabby cut across her forehead, others on the back of her arm. Whip marks. Pharaoh swallowed, watched the girl toiling along. An old man, just in front of her, tripped and sprawled face first into the road, making the whole column stumble to a halt. "Halt! Move!" barked one of the riders, spurring his horse forward. "On your feet!" The old man struggled in the dust. "Move!" The soldier's whip cracked, leaving a long red mark across the man's scrawny back. Pharaoh twitched and winced at the sound, and her back began to tingle, where the scars were, almost as if she'd been whipped herself. "No one whips Pharaoh Maljin and lives. Not anymore." She shrugged a bough off her shoulder. "Peace, Pharaoh!" hissed Yue, grabbing her by the arm. "There's nothing you can do for them." The girl bent down, helping the old slave to his feet. The whip cracked again, catching them both, and there was a yelp of pain. Was it the girl or the man who had cried out, or had it been Pharaoh herself? She shook Yue's hand off, reaching for an arrow. "I can kill this bastard," she snarled. The soldier's head snapped round to look at them, curious. Yue's eyes hold of her hand. "What then?" he hissed. "If you killed all 6 of them, what then? Have you food and water for 100 slaves? You have it well concealed. And when the column is missed? And their guards found slaughtered?" She wondered whether or not to try and kill him again. No, he was right, damn him. Slowly, she pushed the anger back as far down as it would go. She shoved the arrow away and turned back towards the column. She watched the old slave stumble on and the girl after him, fury gnawing at her guts like hunger. "You!" called the soldier, nudging his horse over towards them. "You've done it now!" hissed Yue. Then he bowed to the guard, smiling, scraping. "My apologies, master. My son is—" "No need to be shy," chuckled the soldier. "I've seen you looking." He turned towards the column. "Hold them up there," he shouted, and the slaves stumbled to a halt. He leaned from his saddle and grabbed the scrawny girl under the armpit, dragging her roughly out of the column. "She's a good one," he said, pulling her towards Pharaoh. Bit young, but she's ready. Clean up nice, she will. Bit of a limp, but that'll heal. We've been driving 'em hard. Good teeth. Show 'em your teeth, bitch. The girl's cracked lips curled back slowly. Good teeth. What do you say, boy? 10 in gold for her. It's a good price. Pharaoh stood there staring. The girl looked dumbly back with big, dead eyes. Look, said the soldier, leaning down from his saddle. She's worth twice that, and there's no danger in it. When we get to Shaffa, I'll tell them she died out here in the dust. No one will wonder at that. It happens all the time. I get 10, and you save 10. Everyone wins. Everyone wins. Pharaoh stared up at the guard. He pulled his helmet off, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Peace, Pharaoh, whispered Yulwei. All right, 8, shouted the soldier. She's got a nice smile. Show him a smile, bitch. The corner of the girl's mouth twitched slightly. There, see. 8, and you're stealing from me. Pharaoh's fists were clenched, nails digging into her palms. Peace, Pharaoh, whispered Yulwei, with a warning note in his voice. God's teeth. But you drive a bargain, boy. 7, and that's my last offer. 7, damn it. The soldier waved his helmet around in frustration. Use her gently. In 5 years she'll be worth more. It's an investment. The soldier's face was just a few feet away. She could see each tiny bead of sweat forming on his forehead, each stubbly hair on his cheeks, each blemish, nick, and pore on his skin. She could smell him, almost. The truly thirsty will drink piss or salt water or oil, however bad for them. So great is their need to drink. Pharaoh had seen it often in the Badlands. That was the extent of her need to kill this man now. She wanted to tear him with her bare hands, to choke the life from him, to rip his face with her teeth. The desire was almost too strong to resist. Peace, hissed Yulai. I can't afford her, Pharaoh heard herself saying. You might have said so before, boy, and saved me the trouble. The soldier stuck his helmet back on. Still, I can't blame you for looking. She's a good one. He reached down and grabbed the girl under the arm, dragging her back towards the others. They'll get 20 for her in Shaffa, he shouted over his shoulder. The column moved on. Pharaoh watched the girl until the slaves disappeared over a rise, stumbling, limping, shambling towards slavery. She felt cold now, cold and empty. She wished she had killed the guard, whatever the cost. Killing him could have filled that empty space, if only for a while. That was how it worked. I walked in a column like that, she said slowly. Yulvai gave a long sigh. I know, Pharaoh, I know. But fate has chosen you for saving. Be grateful for it, if you know how. You should have let me kill him. You? Clucked the old man in disgust. I do declare, you'd kill the whole world if you could. Is there anything but killing in you, Pharaoh? There used to be, she muttered. But they whip it out of you. They whip you until they're sure there's nothing left. Yulwei stood there with that pitying look on his face. Strange how it didn't make her angry anymore. I'm sorry, Pharaoh. Sorry for you and for them. He stepped back into the road, shaking his head. But it's better than death. She stayed for a moment, watching the dust rising from the distant column. The same, she whispered to herself. Chapter 5. Sore thumb. Logen leaned against the parapet, squinted into the morning sun, and took in the view. He'd done the same. It felt long ago now, from the balcony of his room at the library. The two views could hardly have been more different. Sunrise over the jagged carpet of buildings on the one hand, hot and glaring bright, and full of distant noise. The cold and misty valley on the other, soft and empty and still as death. He remembered that morning, remembered how he'd felt like a different man. He certainly felt a different man now. A stupid man. Small, scared, ugly, and confused. Logen. Malika stepped out onto the balcony to stand beside him, smiled up at the sun and out over the city to the sparkling bay, already busy with ships. Beautiful, isn't it, if you say so, but I'm not sure I see it. All those people. Logen gave a sweaty shiver. It's not right. It frightens me. Frightened? You? Always. Logen had barely slept since they arrived. It was never properly dark here, never properly quiet. It was too hot, too close, too stinking. Enemies might be terrifying, but enemies could be fought and put an end to. Logen could understand their hatred. There was no fighting the faceless, careless, rumbling city. It hated everything. This is no place for me. I'll be glad to leave. We might not be leaving for a while. I know. Logen took a deep breath. That's why I'm going to go down and look at this agreement, and find out what I can about it. Some things have to be done. It's better to do them than to live with the fear of them. That's what my father used to tell me. Good advice. I'll come with you. You will not. Bayaz was in the doorway, glaring out at his apprentice. Your progress over the last few weeks has been a disgrace, even for you. He stepped through into the open air. I suggest that while we are idle, waiting on His Majesty's pleasure, you should take the opportunity to study. Another such chance may be a long time coming. Malikus hurried back inside with no backward glances. He knew better than to dawdle with his master in this mood. Bayaz had lost all his good humor as soon as they arrived at the agreement, and it didn't look like coming back. Logen could hardly blame him. They'd been treated more like prisoners than guests. He didn't know much about manners, but he could guess the meaning of hard stares from everyone and guards outside the door. You wouldn't believe how it's grown, growled Bayaz, frowning out at the great sweep of city. I remember when Adua was barely more than a huddle of shacks, squeezed in round the house of the maker like flies round a fresh turd. Before there was an agreement, before there was a union even, they weren't half so proud in those days, I can tell you. They worshipped the maker like a god. He noisily hawked up a lump of phlegm and spat it out into the air. Logen watched it clear the moat and vanish somewhere in amongst the white buildings below. I gave them this, hissed Bayaz. Logen felt the unpleasant creeping sensation that always seemed to accompany the old wizard's displeasure. I gave them freedom, and this is the thanks I get. The scorn of clerks, of swollen-headed old errand boys. A trip down into the suspicion and madness below began to seem like a merciful release. Logen edged towards the door and ducked back into the room beyond. If they were prisoners here, then Logen had been in some harder cells, he had to admit. Their round living room was fit for a king, to his mind at least. Heavy chairs of dark wood with delicate carvings, thick hangings on the walls showing woods and hunting scenes. Bethod would most likely have felt at home in such a room. Logen felt like an oaf there, always on his toes, in case he broke something. A tall jar stood on a table in the chamber's center, its sides painted with bright flowers. Logen eyed it suspiciously as he made for the long stair down into the agreement. Logen! Bayaz was framed in the doorway, frowning after him. Take care. The place may seem strange, but the people are strangers still. The water frothed and gurgled, spurting up in a narrow jet from a metal tube, carved like a fish's mouth, then splashing back down into a wide stone basin. A fountain, the proud young man had called it. Pipes beneath the earth, he'd said. Logen pictured underground streams, coursing just beneath his feet, washing at the foundations of the place. The thought made him feel slightly dizzy. The square was vast, a great plain of flat stones, hemmed in by sheer cliffs of white buildings. Hollow cliffs, covered with pillars and carvings, glittering with tall windows, crawling with people. Something strange seemed to be happening today. All around the distant edges of the square, an enormous sloping structure of wooden beams was being built. An army of workmen swarmed over it, hacking and bludgeoning, swinging at pegs and joints, hurling bad-tempered shouts at each other. All around them were mountains of planks and logs, barrels of nails, stacks of tools, enough to build 10 mighty halls and more besides. In places the structure was already far above the ground, its uprights soaring into the air like the masts of great ships, as high as the monstrous buildings behind. Logen stood, hands on hips, gawping at the enormous wooden skeleton, but its purpose was a mystery. He stepped up to a short, muscular man in a leather apron, sawing furiously at a plank. What's this, eh? The man didn't even look up from his task. This, what's it for? The saw bit through the wood. The offcut clattered to the ground. The carpenter hefted the rest of the plank onto a pile nearby. He turned round, eyeing Logen suspiciously, wiping sweat from his glistening forehead. Stands. Seating. Logen stared vacantly back at him. How could something stand and sit at once? For the contest, the carpenter shouted in his face. Logen backed slowly away. Gibberish. Nonsense words. He turned and hurried off, keeping well clear of the huge wooden structures and the men clambering over them. He blundered out onto a broad lane, a deep gorge between looming white buildings. Statues faced each other down either side, much larger than life, frowning over the heads of the many people hurrying between. The nearest of the carvings seemed strangely familiar. Logen walked over to it, looked it up and down, then grinned to himself. The first of the Magi had gained some weight since it was sculpted. Too much good eating at the library, maybe. Logen turned towards a small man with a black hat, walking by with a big book under his arm. "Beaz," he said, pointing up at the statue. "Friend of mine." The man stared at him, at the statue, back at him, and hurried away. The carvings marched on down either side of the avenue. Kings of the Union, Logen guessed, stood in line on the left. Some carried swords, some scrolls or tiny ships. One had a dog at his feet, another a sheaf of wheat under his arm. But otherwise there wasn't much to tell them apart. They all had the same tall crowns and the same stern frowns. You wouldn't have thought to look at them that they'd ever said a stupid word, or done a stupid thing, or had to take a shit in all their lives. Logen heard rapid footsteps thumping up behind him, and he turned just in time to see the proud young man from the gate, pounding down the avenue, shirt soaked through with sweat. Logen wondered where he might be going in such a hurry, but he was damned if he was going to run to catch up with him, not in this heat. The lane opened out into a great, green space, scooped out from the country by giant hands, and dropped in amongst the tall buildings, but like no countryside that Logen had ever seen. The grass was a smooth, even blanket of vivid green, shaved almost to the ground. There were flowers, but growing in rows and circles and straight lines of bright color. There were lush bushes and trees, all squeezed and fenced and clipped into unnatural shapes. There was water, 2 streams bubbling over stone steps, a great flat pond with sad-looking trees trailing round its edge. Logen wandered through this square-edged greenery, boots crunching on a path made of tiny gray stones. There were lots of people gathered here, squeezed in together to enjoy the sun. They sat in boats on a miniature lake, rowing gently round and round, going nowhere. They lazed on the lawns, ate, drank, and babbled to one another. Some of them would point at Logen and shout, or whisper, or slope away. They were a strange-seeming crowd, especially the women, pale and ghostly, swaddled in elaborate dresses, hair scraped up and piled and stuck through with pins and combs, and great weird feathers or useless tiny hats. They seemed like the big jar in the round chamber, too thin and delicate to be any use, and further spoiled by too much decoration. But it had been a long time, and he smiled at them cheerfully, on the off chance. Some looked shocked, others gasped in horror. Logen sighed. The old magic was still there. Further on in another wide square, Logen stopped to watch a group of soldiers practice. These weren't beggars or girlish youths. These were solid-looking men wearing heavy armor, breastplates and greaves, polished mirror-bright, long spears shouldered. They stood together, each man the same as the one beside, in 4 squares of maybe 50 men each, still as the statues in the avenue. At a bellow from a short man in a red jacket, their chief, Logen reckoned the whole crowd turned, leveled their spears, and began to advance across the square, heavy boots tramping together. Each man the same, armed the same, moving the same. It was quite a sight, all that shining metal moving steadily in bristling squares, spear points glittering, like some great square hedgehog with 200 legs. Deadly enough, no doubt, on a big flat space against an imaginary enemy right in front. How it would work on broken rocks, in the tipping rain, in a tangled wood, Logen was less sure. Those men would tire quickly, in all that weight of armor. And if the squares could be broken, what would they do? Men who were used to always having others at their shoulder. Could they fight alone? He plodded on, through wide courtyards and neat gardens, past gurgling fountains and proud statues, down clean lanes and broad avenues. He wandered up and down narrow stairways, across bridges over streams, over roads, over other bridges. He saw guards in a dozen different splendid liveries, guarding 100 different gates and walls and doors, everyone eyeing him with the same deep suspicion. The sun climbed in the sky. The tall white buildings slid by until Logen was footsore and half lost, his neck aching from looking always upwards. The only constant was the monstrous tower which loomed high, high over everything else, making the greatest of the great buildings seem mean. It was always there, glimpsed out of the corner of your eye, peering over the tops of the roofs in the distance. Logen's footsteps dragged him slowly closer and closer to it, until he came to a neglected corner of the citadel in its very shadow. He found an old bench beside a ragged lawn near a great crumbling building, coated with moss and ivy, its steep roofs sagging in the middles and missing tiles. He slumped down, puffing out his cheeks, and frowned up at that enormous shape beyond the walls, cut out dark against the blue, a man-made mountain of dry, stark, dead stones. No plants clung to that looming mass, not even a clump of moss in the cracks between the great blocks. The house of the maker, Bias had called it. It looked like no house that Logen had ever seen. There were no roofs above, no doors or windows in those naked walls. A cluster of mighty, sharp-edged tiers of rock. What need could there ever be to build a thing so big? Who was this maker anyway? Was this all he made? A great big, useless house? You mind if I sit? There was a woman looking down at Logen, more what he would have called a woman than those strange, ghostly things in the park. A pretty woman in a white dress, face framed by dark hair. Do I mind? No, bow. It's a funny thing, but no one else wants to sit with me. She dropped down at the far end of the bench, resting her chin on her hands, her elbows on her knees, gazing up without interest at the looming tower. Perhaps they're afraid of you. Logen watched a man hurry past with a sheaf of papers under his arm, staring at him with wide eyes. I'm starting to think the same thing. You do look a little dangerous. Hideous is the word you're looking for. I usually find the words I'm looking for, and I say dangerous. Well, looks can lie. She lifted an eyebrow, looking him slowly up and down. You must be a man of peace, then. Huh, not entirely. They looked at each other sidelong. She didn't seem afraid or scornful or even interested. Why aren't you scared? I'm from England. I know your people. Besides, and she let her head drop onto the back of the bench, no one else will talk to me. I'm desperate. Logen stared at the stump of his middle finger, waggled it back and forth as far as it would go. You'd have to be. I'm Logen. Good for you. I'm nobody. Everybody's somebody. Not me. I'm nothing. I'm invisible. Logen frowned at her, turned sideways to him lounging back on the bench in the sun, her long, smooth neck stretched out, chest rising and falling gently. I see you. She rolled her head to look at him. You are a gentleman. Logen snorted with laughter. He'd been called a lot of things in his time, but never that. The young woman didn't join him in his amusement. I don't belong here, she muttered to herself. Neither one of us. No. But this is my home. She got up from the bench. Goodbye, Logen. Fare you well, nobody. He watched her turn and walk slowly away, shaking his head. Bias had been right. The place was strange, but the people were strangers still. Logen woke with a painful start, blinked and stared wildly about him. Dark. Not quite entirely dark, of course. There was still the ever-present glow of the city. He thought he'd heard something, but there was nothing now. It was hot. Hot and close and strangling, even with the sticky draught from the open window. He groaned, threw the damp blankets down around his waist, rubbed the sweat from his chest, and wiped it on the wall behind him. The light nagged at his eyelids, and that was not the worst of his problems. Say one thing for Logen Ninefingers. Say that he needs to piss. Unfortunately, you couldn't just piss in a pot in this place. They had a special thing, like a flat wooden shelf with a hole in it, in a little room. He'd peered down into that hole when they first arrived, wondering what it could be for. It seemed like a long way down, and it smelled bad. Malachus had explained it to him. A pointless and barbaric invention. You had to sit there on the hard wood, an unpleasant draught blowing round your fruits. But that was civilization so far as Logen could tell. People with nothing better to do, dreaming up ways to make easy things difficult. He floundered out of bed and picked his way to where he remembered the door being, bent over with his arms feeling about in front of him. Too light to sleep, but too dark to actually see anything. Fucking civilization, he muttered to himself as he fumbled with the latch on the door, sliding his bare feet cautiously into the big circular room at the center of their chambers. It was cool in here, very cool. The cold air felt good on his bare skin after the damp heat of his bedroom. Why wasn't he sleeping in here, instead of that oven next door? He squinted at the shadowy walls, face all screwed up with the painful fuzz of sleep, trying to work out which blurry door led to the pissing shelf. Knowing his luck, he'd probably blunder into Bayaz's room and accidentally piss on the first of the Magi while he was asleep. That would be just the thing to sweeten the wizard's temper. He took a step forward. There was a clunk and a rattle as his leg barged into the corner of the table. He cursed, grabbing at his bruised shin. Then he remembered the jar. He lunged and caught it by the rim just before it fell. His eyes were adjusting to the half-light now, and he could just make out the flowers painted on the cold, shiny surface. He moved to put it back on the table, but then it occurred to him. Why go any further when he had a perfectly good pot right there? He glanced furtively round the room, swinging the jar into position, then froze. He was not alone. A tall, slender figure, vague in the half-light. He could just make out long hair, blowing gently in the breeze from the open window. He strained against the darkness, but he couldn't see the face. Logen, a woman's voice, soft and low. He didn't like the sound of it one bit. It was cold in the room, very cold. It all felt real, horribly real. Logen. The woman moved silently towards him. Soft light from the window caught the side of her face. A white cheek, a shadowy eye socket, the corner of a mouth, then sunk in darkness again. There was something familiar. Logen's mind fumbled for it as he backed away, eyes fixed on her outline, keeping the table between them. "What do you want?" He had a cold feeling in his chest, a bad feeling. He knew he should be shouting for help, raising the others, but somehow he had to know who it was. Had to know. The air was freezing. Logen could almost see his breath smoking before his face. His wife was dead. He knew that, dead and cold, and gone back to the mud, long ago and far away. He'd seen the village burned to ashes, full of corpses. His wife was dead, and yet, Thelfi, he whispered. Logen. Her voice. His mouth dropped open. She reached out for him, through the light from the window. Pale hand, pale fingers, long white nails. The room was icy cold. "Logen, you're dead!" He raised the jar, ready to smash it down on her head. The hand reached out, fingers spreading wide. Suddenly, the room was bright as day. Brighter. Brilliant, searing, bright. The murky outlines of the doors, the furniture, were transformed into hard white edges, black shadows. Logen squeezed his eyes shut, shielded them with his arm, dropped back, gasping against the wall. There was a deafening crash like a landslide, a tearing and splintering like a great tree falling. A stink of burning wood. Logen opened one eye a crack, peered out from between his fingers. The chamber was strangely altered, dark once more, but less dark than before. Light filtered in through a great ragged hole in the wall where the window used to be. 2 of the chairs had gone. A third teetered on 3 legs, broken edges glowing faintly, smoldering like sticks that had been a long time in a fire. The table, standing right beside him just a moment before, was sheared in half on the other side of the room. Part of the ceiling had been torn away from the rafters, and the floor was littered with chunks of stone and plaster, broken lengths of wood and fragments of glass. Of the strange woman, there was no sign. Bayaz picked his way unsteadily through the wreckage towards the gaping hole in the wall, nightshirt flapping around his thick calves, and peered out into the night. "It's gone?" Logen stared at the steaming hole. "She knew my name." The wizard stumbled over to the last remaining intact chair and flung himself into it like a man exhausted. "An eater, perhaps? Sent by Khalul?" "A what?" asked Logen, baffled. "Sent by who?" Bayaz wiped sweat from his face. "You wanted not to know." "That's true." Logen couldn't deny it. He rubbed at his chin, staring out of the ragged patch of night sky, wondering whether now might be a good time to change his mind. But by then, it was too late. There was a frantic hammering at the door. "Get that, would you?" Logen stumbled stupidly through the debris and slid back the bolt. An angry-looking guard shouldered his way past, a lamp in one hand, drawn sword in the other. There was a noise! The light from his lamp swept over the wreckage, found the ragged edge of the ripped plaster, the broken stone, the empty night sky beyond. "Shit," he whispered. "We had an uninvited guest," muttered Logen. I must notify." The guard looked thoroughly confused. "Somebody. He tripped and nearly fell over a fallen beam as he backed towards the door. Logen heard his footsteps rattling away down the stairs. "What's an eater?" There was no reply. The wizard was asleep, eyes closed, a deep frown on his face, chest moving slowly. Logen looked down. He was surprised to see he still had the pot, beautiful and delicate, clasped tightly in his right hand. He carefully swept clear a space on the floor and set the jar down, in amongst the wreckage. One of the doors banged open and Logen's heart jumped. It was Malachus, wild-eyed and staring, hair sticking up off his head at all angles. "What the—" He stumbled to the hole and peered gingerly out into the night. "Shit! Malachus! What's an eater?" Quai's head snapped round to look at Logen, his face a picture of horror. "It's forbidden," he whispered. "To eat the flesh of men." Chapter 6. Questions. Glokta heaped porridge into his mouth as fast as he could, hoping to get half a meal's worth down before his gorge began to rise. He swallowed, coughed, shuddered. He shoved the bowl away, as though its very presence offended him, which in fact it does. "This had better be important. Severed," he grumbled. The practical scraped his greasy hair back with one hand. "Depends what you mean by important. It's about our magical friends." "Ah, the first of the Magi and his bold companions. What about them?" "There was some manner of a disturbance at their chambers last night. Someone broke in, they say. There was a fight of some sort. Seems as if some damage was done. Someone, some sort. Some damage?" Glokta gave a disapproving shake of his head. "Seems? Seems isn't good enough for us, Severard. Well, it'll have to be this time." The guard was a little thin on the details. Looked damn worried, if you ask me. Severard sprawled a little deeper into his chair, shoulders hunching up around his ears. "Someone needs to go and look into it. Might as well be us. You can get a good look at them close up. Ask them some questions, maybe. Where are they? You'll love this. The Tower of Chains." Glokta scowled as he sucked a few bits of porridge from his empty gums. "Of course. And right at the top, I bet. Lots of steps. Anything else?" "The Northman went for a stroll yesterday, walked in circles round half the Agrient. We watched him, of course." The practical sniffed and adjusted his mask. "Ugly bastard. Ah, the infamous Northman. Did he commit any outrages? Rape and murder, buildings aflame, that type of thing?" "Not much, being honest. A tedious morning for everyone. Wandered around and gawped at things. He spoke to a couple of people. Anyone we know? No one important. One of the carpenters working on the stands for the contest. A clerk on the Kingsway. There was some girl near the university. He spoke to her for a while. A girl." Severad's eyes grinned. "That's right. And a nice-looking one, too. What was her name?" He snapped his fingers. "I made sure I found it out. Her brother's with the King's Own. West, something West, R.D. That's the one. You know her, hmm?" Glokta licked at his empty gums. "She asked me how I was. I remember. What did they have to talk about?" The practical raised his eyebrows. "Probably nothing. She's from England, though, not been in the city long. Might be some connection." "You want me to bring her in? We could soon find out." "No," snapped Glokta. "No, no need. Her brother used to be a friend of mine. Used to be. No one touches her, Severard, you hear?" The practical shrugged. "If you say so, Inquisitor. If you say so, I do." There was a pause. "So we're done with the Mercers then, are we?" Severard sounded almost wistful. "It would seem so. They're finished. Nothing but some cleaning up to do." "Some lucrative cleaning up, I dare say." "I dare say," said Glokta sourly. "But His Eminence feels our talents will be better used elsewhere. Like watching fake wizards. Hope you didn't lose out on your little property by the docks." Severard shrugged. "I wouldn't be surprised if you need somewhere away from prying eyes again before too long. It'll still be there. At the right price. Shame to leave a job half done is all." "True." Glokta paused for a moment, considering. "Dangerous. The Arch Lector said go no further. Very dangerous to disobey. And yet I smell something. It niggles to leave a loose end, whatever His Eminence might say. There might be one more thing." "Really?" "Yes. But keep it subtle. Do you know anything about banks? Big buildings. They lend people money." Glokta gave a thin smile. "I had no idea you were such an expert. There's one in particular I'm interested in. Name of Valent and Balk. Never heard of them. but I can ask around. Just keep it discreet, Severard. Do you understand me? No one can know about this. I mean it. Discretion is what I'm all about, Chief. Ask anyone. Discreet. That's me. Known for it. You'd better be, Severard. You had better be, or it could be both our heads. Glokta sat, wedged into the embrasure with his back against the stones and his left leg stretched out in front of him, a searing, pulsing furnace of pain. He expected pain, of course, every moment of every day. But this is something just a bit special. Every breath was a rattling moan through rigid jaws. Every tiniest movement was a mighty task. He remembered how Marshal Varuz had made him run up and down these steps when he was training for the contest years ago. I took them 3 at a time, up and down, without a second thought. Now look at me. Who would have thought it could come to this? His trembling body ran with sweat. His stinging eyes ran with tears. His burning nose dripped watery snot. All this water flowing out of me. And yet I'm thirsty as hell. Where's the sense in that? Where was the sense in any of it? What if someone should come past and see me like this? The terrifying scourge of the Inquisition, flopped on his arse in a window, barely able to move. Will I force a nonchalant smile onto this rigid mask of agony? Will I pretend that all is well? That I often come here, to sprawl beside the stairs? Or will I weep and scream and beg for help? But no one passed. He lay there, wedged in that narrow space, 3/4 of the way up the tower of chains, the back of his head resting on the cool stones, his trembling knees drawn up in front of him. Sandan Glokta, master swordsman, dashing cavalry officer, what glorious future might he have in front of him? There was a time when I could run for hours, run, and never tire. He could feel a trickle of sweat running down his back. Why do I do this? Why the hell would anyone do this? I could stop today. I could go home to Mother. But then what? Then what? Inquisitor, I'm glad you're here. Good for you, bastard. I'm not. Glokta leaned against the wall at the top of the stairs, such teeth as he had grinding against his gums. They're inside, it's quite a mess. Glokta's hand trembled, the tip of his cane rattling against the stones. His head swam. The guard was blurry and dim through his twitching eyelids. Are you all right? He loomed forwards, one arm outstretched. Glokta looked up. Just get the fucking door, fool. The man jumped away, hurried to the door, and pushed it open. Every part of Glokta longed to give up and sprawl on his face. But he willed himself upright. He forced one foot before the other, forced his breath to come even, forced his shoulders back and his head high, and swept imperiously past the guard, every part of his body singing with pain. What he saw beyond the doors almost broke his veneer of composure, however. Yesterday, these were some of the finest rooms in the Agrient. They were reserved for the most honored of guests, the most important of foreign dignitaries. Yesterday, a gaping hole was ripped out of one wall where the window should have been. The sky beyond blinding bright after the darkness of the stairwell. A section of the ceiling had collapsed, broken timbers and shreds of plaster hanging down into the room. The floor was strewn with chunks of stone, splinters of glass, torn fragments of colored cloth. The antique furniture had been smashed to scattered pieces, broken edges charred and blackened as if by fire. Only one chair, half a table, and a tall ornamental jar, strangely pristine in the middle of the rubble-strewn floor, had escaped the destruction. In the midst of this expensive wreckage stood a confused and sickly-seeming young man. He looked up as Glokta picked his way through the rubble round the doorway, tongue darting nervously over his lips, evidently on edge. Has anyone ever looked more of a fraud? Good morning? The young man's fingers twitched nervously at his gown, a heavy thing, stitched with arcane symbols. And doesn't he look uncomfortable in it? If this man is a wizard's apprentice, I am the Emperor of Gurkhal. I am Glokta, from His Majesty's Inquisition. I have been sent to investigate this unfortunate business. I was expecting someone older. Oh yes, sorry. I am Malachus Quay, stammered the young man. Apprentice to great Bayaz, the first of the Magi, great in high art and learned in deep kneel before me. I am the mighty Emperor of Gurkhal. Malachus, Glokta cut him off rudely. Quay, you are from the old empire. Why yes, the young man brightened slightly at that. Do you know my... No, not at all. The pale face sagged. Were you here last night? Yes, I was asleep, next door. I'm afraid I didn't see anything, though. Glokta stared at him, intent and unblinking, trying to work him out. The apprentice coughed and looked at the floor, as if wondering what to clean up first. Can this really make the Arch Lector nervous? A miserable actor? His whole manner reeks of deception. Someone saw something, though. Well, Master Ninefingers. I suppose Ninefingers. Yes, our northern companion. The young man brightened. A warrior of great renown, a champion, a prince among his... You from the old empire. A Northman. What a cosmopolitan band you are. Well, yes, haha, we do. I suppose where is Ninefingers now? Still asleep, I think. I could wake him. Would you be so kind? Glokta tapped his cane on the floor. It was quite a climb, and I would rather not come back later. No, of course. Sorry. He hastened over to one of the doors, and Glokta turned away, pretending to examine the gaping wound in the wall, while grimacing in agony and biting his lip to keep from wailing like a sick child. He seized hold of the broken stones at the edge of the hole with his free hand, squeezing them as hard as he could. As the spasm passed, he began to take more interest in the damage. Even this high up the wall was a good 4 feet thick, solidly built from rubble bonded with mortar, faced with cut stone blocks. It would take a rock from a truly mighty catapult to make such a breach, or a team of strong workmen going night and day for a week. A giant siege engine, or a group of laborers would doubtless have attracted the attention of the guards. So how was it made? Glokta ran his hand over the cracked stones. He had once heard rumors that in the far south they made a kind of blasting powder. Could a little powder have done this? The door opened and Glokta turned to see a big man ducking under the low lintel, buttoning his shirt with slow, heavy hands. A thoughtful kind of slowness, as if he could move quickly but doesn't see the point. His hair was a tangled mass, his lumpy face badly scarred. The middle finger of his left hand was missing, hence Ninefingers. How very imaginative. Sleeping late? The Northman nodded. Your city is too hot for me. It keeps me up at night and makes me sleepy in the day. Glokta's leg was throbbing. His back was groaning. His neck was stiff as a dry branch. It was all he could do to keep his agony a secret. He would have given anything to sprawl in that one undamaged chair and scream his head off. But I must stand and trade words with these charlatans. Could you explain to me what happened here? Ninefingers shrugged. I needed to piss in the night. I saw someone in the room. He had little trouble with the common tongue, it seemed, even if the content was hardly polite. Did you see who this someone was? No. It was a woman, I saw that much. He worked his shoulders, clearly uncomfortable. A woman, really. This story becomes more ridiculous by the second. Anything else? Can we narrow our search beyond half the population? It was cold. Very cold. Cold? Of course, why not? On one of the hottest nights of the year. Glokta stared into the Northman's eyes for a long time, and he stared back. Dark, cool blue eyes, deeply set, not the eyes of an idiot. He may look an ape, but he doesn't talk like one. He thinks before he speaks, then says no more than he has to. This is a dangerous man. What is your business in the city, Master Ninefingers? I came with Bias. If you want to know his business, you can ask him. Honestly, I don't know. He pays you then? No. You follow him out of loyalty? Not exactly. But you are his servant? No. Not really. The Northman scratched slowly at his stubbly jaw. I don't know what I am. A big ugly liar is what you are. But how to prove it? Glokta waved his cane around the shattered chamber. How did your intruder cause so much damage? Bias did that. He did. How? Art, he calls it. Art. Base magic is wild and dangerous, intoned the apprentice pompously, as though he were saying something of great importance, for it comes from the other side, and to touch the world below is fraught with peril. The magus tempers magic with knowledge, and thus produces high art. But like the smith or the other side, snapped Glokta, putting a sharp end to the young moron's stream of drivel. The world below? Hell, do you mean? Magic. Do you know any magic, Master Ninefingers, man? The Northman chuckled. No, he thought about it for a moment, and then added, almost as an afterthought, I can speak to the spirits, though. The spirits, is that so? For pity's sake. Perhaps they could tell us who this intruder was. I'm afraid not. Ninefingers shook his head sadly, either missing Glokta's sarcasm or choosing to ignore it. There are none left awake in this place. They are sleeping here. They have been for a long time. Ah, of course, well past spirits' bedtime. I tire of this nonsense. You come from Bethod. You could say that. It was Glokta who was surprised. He had expected at best a sharp intake of breath, a hurried effort at concealment, not a frank admission. Ninefingers did not even blink, however. I was once his champion. Champion! I fought 10 duels for him. Glokta groped for words. Did you win? I was lucky. You realize, of course, that Bethod has invaded the Union? I do. Ninefingers sighed. I should have killed that bastard long ago, but I was young then. And stupid. Now I doubt I'll get another chance, but that's the way of things. You have to be, what's the word for it? Realistic, said Quay. Glokta frowned. A moment ago, he had teetered on the brink of making sense of all this nonsense. But the moment had slipped away, and things made less sense than ever. He stared at Ninefingers. But that scarred face held no answers, only more questions. Only more questions. Talking with spirits. Bethod's champion but his enemy. Assaulted by a mysterious woman in the dead of night. And he doesn't even know why he's here. A clever liar tells as much truth as he can, but this one tells so many lies I hardly know where to begin. Ah, we have a guest. An old man stepped into the room, thick-set and stocky with a short gray beard, vigorously rubbing his bald head with a cloth. So this is Bayaz. He threw himself down in the one intact chair, moving with none of the grace one would expect from an important historical figure. I must apologize. I was taking advantage of the bath, a very fine bath. I have been bathing every day since we arrived here at the Agrient. I grew so besmirched with the dirt of the road that I have positively seized upon the opportunity to be clean again. The old man rubbed his hand over his hairless scalp with a faint hissing sound. Glokta mentally compared his features to those of Bayaz's statue in the Kingsway. There is hardly anything uncanny about the resemblance. Half as commanding and a great deal shorter. Given an hour I could find 5 old men who looked more convincing. If I took a razor to Arch Lector's salt, I could do better. Glokta glanced at his shiny pate. I wonder if he takes a razor to that every morning. And you are? Asked the supposed Bayaz. Inquisitor Glokta. Ah, one of His Majesty's inquisitors. We are honored. Oh no, the honor is mine. You, after all, are the legendary Bayaz, first of the Magi. The old man glared back at him, his green eyes prickly hard. Legendary is perhaps a shade too much, but I am Bayaz. Your companion, Master Ninefingers, was just describing last night's events to me. A colorful tale. He claims that you caused. All this, the old man snorted. I am not in the habit of welcoming uninvited guests, so I see. Alas, there was some damage to the suite. In my experience, one should act quickly and decisively. The pieces can always be picked up afterward, of course. Of course, forgive my ignorance, Master Bayaz. But how, precisely, was the damage caused? The old man smiled. You can understand that we do not share the secrets of our order with just anyone, and I am afraid that I already have an apprentice. He indicated the unconvincing youth. We met. In simple terms, then, perhaps, that I might understand. You would call it magic. Magic. I see. Indeed. It is, after all, what we Magi are best known for. I don't suppose you would be kind enough to demonstrate for my benefit. Oh no, the so-called wizard gave a comfortable laugh. I don't do tricks. This old fool is as hard to fathom as the Northman. The one barely speaks, while the other talks and talks but says nothing. I must admit to being somewhat at a loss as to how this intruder got in. Glokta glanced round the room, examining the possible means of entrance. The guard saw nothing, which leaves the window. He shuffled cautiously to the hole and peered out. There had been a small balcony, but a few stubby splinters of stone were all that remained. Otherwise, the wall fell smooth and sheer all the way to the glittering water far, far below. That's quite a climb to make. especially in a dress. An impossible one, wouldn't you say? How do you think this woman made it? The old man snorted. Do you want me to do your job for you? Perhaps she clambered up the latrine chute. The Northman looked deeply troubled by that suggestion. Why don't you catch her and ask her? Isn't that what you're here for? Touchy, and consummately acted. An air of injured innocence so convincing, he almost has me believing this garbage. Almost, but not quite. Therein lies the problem. There is no sign of your mysterious intruder. No body has been recovered. Some wood, small pieces of furniture, the stones from the wall. They were scattered widely in the streets below, but nothing of any intruder, of either sex. The old man stared back at him, a hard frown beginning to form on his face. Perhaps the body burned to nothing. Perhaps it was torn apart, into pieces too small to see, or boiled away into the air. Magic is not always precise or predictable even in the hands of a master. Such things can happen. Easily. Particularly when I become annoyed. I fear I must risk your annoyance, though. It has occurred to me that you might not, in fact, be Bayaz, the first of the Magi. Indeed. The old man's bushy eyebrows drew together. I must at least entertain the possibility. A tense stillness had settled on the room. That you are an impostor, a fraud, snapped the so-called magus. The pale young man lowered his head and backed quietly away towards the wall. Glokta felt suddenly very alone in the midst of that rubble-strewn circle, alone and increasingly unsure of himself. But he soldiered on. It had occurred to me that this whole event might have been staged for our benefit. A convenient demonstration of your magical powers. Convenient, hissed the bald old man, his voice unnaturally loud. Convenient, say you? It would be convenient if I was left to enjoy a night's sleep uninterrupted. Convenient if I was now sitting in my old chair on the closed council. Convenient if people took my word as law, the way they used to, without asking a lot of damn fool questions. The resemblance to the statue on the Kingsway was suddenly much increased. There now was the frown of command, the sneer of contempt, the threat of terrible anger. The old man's words seemed to press on Glokta like a great weight, driving the breath from his body, threatening to crush him to his knees, cutting into his skull, and leaving behind a creeping shred of doubt. He glanced up at the yawning hole in the wall. Powder? Catapults? Laborers? Is there not a simpler explanation? The world seemed to shift around him as it had in the Arch Lector's study a few days before. His mind turned to pieces, pulling them apart, putting them together. What if they are simply telling the truth? What if? No. Glokta forced the idea from his mind. He lifted his head and gave the old man a sneer of his own to think about. An aging actor with a shaved head and a plausible manner. Nothing more. Nothing more. If you are as you say, you have nothing to fear from my questions, or from your answers. The old man cracked a smile, and the strange pressure was suddenly released. Your candor, at least, Inquisitor, is quite refreshing. No doubt you will do your utmost to prove your theory. I wish you luck. I, as you say, have nothing to fear. I would only ask that you find some proof of this deception before bothering us again. Glokta bowed stiffly. I will try to do so, he said, and made for the door. There is one more thing. The old man was looking towards the gaping hole in the wall. Would it be possible to find some other chambers? The wind blows rather chill through these. I will look into it. Good. Perhaps somewhere with fewer steps. Damn things play hell with my knees these days. Indeed. There at least we can agree. Glokta gave the three of them one last inspection. The bald old man stared back, his face a blank wall. The lanky youth glanced up anxiously, then quickly turned away. The Northman was still frowning towards the latrine door. Charlatans, impostors, spies. But how to prove it? Good day, gentlemen. And he limped towards the stairs with as much dignity as he could muster. Chapter 7. Nobility. Jezal scraped the last fair hairs from the side of his jaw and washed the razor off in the bowl. Then he wiped it on the cloth, closed it, and placed it carefully on the table, admiring the way the sunlight glinted on the mother-of-pearl handle. He wiped his face, and then his favorite part of the day gazed at himself in the looking-glass. It was a good one, newly imported from Visserine, a present from his father. An oval of bright, smooth glass in a frame of lavishly carved dark wood, a fitting surround for such a handsome man as the one gazing happily back at him. Honestly, handsome hardly did him justice. "You're quite the beauty, aren't you?" Jezal said to himself, smiling as he ran his fingers over the smooth skin of his jaw. And what a jaw it was! He had often been told it was his best feature, not that there was anything whatever wrong with the rest of him. He turned to the right, then to the left, the better to admire that magnificent chin. Not too heavy, not brutish, but not too light either. Not womanly or weak, a man's jaw, no doubt, with a slight cleft in the chin, speaking of strength and authority, but sensitive and thoughtful too. Had there ever been a jaw like it? Perhaps some king or hero of legend once had one almost as fine. It was a noble jaw, that much was clear. No commoner could ever have had a chin so grand. It must have come from his mother's side of the family, Jezal supposed. His father had rather a weak chin. His brothers, too, come to think of it. You had to feel a little sorry for them. He had got all the looks in his family. And most of the talent, too, he murmured happily to himself. He turned away from the mirror with some reluctance, striding into his living room, pulling his shirt on and buttoning it up the front. He had to look his best today. The thought gave him a little shiver of nerves, starting in his stomach, creeping up his windpipe, lodging in his throat. By now the gates would be open. A steady flood of people would be filing into the agrient, taking their seats on the great wooden benches in the square of marshals. Thousands of them, everyone who was anyone, and plenty more who weren't. They were already gathering, shouting, jostling, excited, waiting for him. Jezal coughed and tried to push the thought from his mind. He had kept himself awake with it for half the night already. He moved over to the table, where the breakfast tray was sitting. He picked up a sausage absently in his fingertips and took a bite off the end, chewing it without relish. He wrinkled his nose and tossed it back in the dish. He had no appetite this morning. He was just wiping his fingers on the cloth when he noticed something lying on the floor by the door, a slip of paper. He bent and picked it up, unfolded it. A single line, written in a neat, precise hand. "Meet me tonight, at the statue of Herod the Great near the Four Corners." Shit, he murmured, disbelieving, reading the line over and over. He folded the paper shut, glancing nervously round the room. He had pushed her to the back of his mind the last couple of days. He had been spending every spare moment training. This brought it all back, though, and no mistake. Shit! He opened the paper and read the line again. "Meet me tonight." He could not escape a slight flush of satisfaction at that, and it slowly became a very distinct glow of pleasure. His mouth curled into a gormless grin. Secret meetings in the darkness. His skin prickled with excitement at the prospect. But secrets have a way of coming to the surface, and what if her brother found out? That thought brought on a fresh rush of nerves. He took the slip of paper in both hands, ready to tear it in half, but at the last moment he folded it instead, and slipped it into his pocket. As Jezal made his way down the tunnel, he could already hear the crowd, a strange, echoing murmur seeming to come out of the very stones. He had heard it before, of course, as a spectator at last year's contest, but it hadn't made his skin sweat and his guts turn over then. Being part of the audience is a world away from being part of the show. He slowed for a moment, then stopped, closing his eyes and leaning against the wall, the noise of the crowd rushing in his ears, trying to breathe deep and compose himself. "Don't worry, I know just how you feel." Jezal felt West's consoling hand on his shoulder. "I nearly turned around and ran the first time. But it'll pass as soon as the steels are drawn. Believe me." "Yes," mumbled Jezal, of course. He doubted that West knew exactly how he felt. The man might have been through a couple of contests before, but Jezal thought it unlikely he had been considering a surreptitious meeting with his best friend's sister the same night. He wondered whether West would be quite so considerate if he knew the contents of the letter in Jezal's breast pocket. It did not seem likely. We'd better get moving. "Wouldn't want them to start without us." "No." Jezal took one last deep breath, opened his eyes and blew out hard. Then he pushed himself away from the wall and strode rapidly down the tunnel. He felt a sudden surge of panic. Where were his steels? He cast about him desperately, then breathed a long sigh. They were in his hand. There was quite a crowd in the hall at the far end. Trainers, seconds, friends, family members and hangers-on. You could tell who the contestants were, though. The 15 young men with steels clutched tightly in their hands. The sense of fear was palpable and contagious. Everywhere Jezal looked, He saw pale, nervous faces, sweaty foreheads, anxious eyes darting around. It wasn't helped by the noise of the crowd, ominously loud beyond the closed double doors at the far end of the room, swelling and subsiding like a stormy sea. There was only one man there who didn't seem at all bothered by the occasion, leaning against the wall on his own, with one foot up on the plaster, and his head tipped back, staring down his nose at the assembly through barely open eyes. Most of the contestants were lithe, stringy, athletic. He was anything but. A big, heavy man with hair shaved to dark stubble. He had a great thick neck and a doorstep of a jaw, the jaw of a commoner, Jezal rather thought. But a large and powerful commoner with a mean streak. Jezal might have taken him for someone's servant, but that he had a pair of steels dangling loosely from one hand. "Gorst," West whispered in Jezal's ear. "Huh? Looks more like a laborer than a swordsman to me. Maybe, but looks can lie." The sound of the crowd was slowly fading, and the nervy chatter within the room subsided along with it. West raised his eyebrows. "The king's address," he whispered. "My friends, my countrymen, my fellow citizens of the Union," came a ringing voice, clearly audible even through the heavy doors. "Huff," snorted West. "Even here he takes the king's place? Why doesn't he just put the crown on and have done with it?" "1 month ago today," came the far-off bellow of the Lord Chamberlain, "fellows of mine on the closed council put forward the question, should there be a contest this year?" Boos and shouts of wild disapproval were heard from the crowd. "A fair question," cried Hoff, "for we are at war, a deadly struggle in the north. The very liberties which we hold so dear, the very freedoms which make us the envy of the world, our very way of life, stand threatened by the savage." A clerk began making his way around the room, separating the contestants from their families, their trainers, their friends. "Good luck," said West, clapping Jezal on the shoulder. "I'll see you out there." Jezal's mouth was dry, and he could only nod. "And these were brave men who asked the question," boomed out Hoff's voice from beyond the doors. "Wise men! Patriots all!" "My stalwart colleagues on the closed council, I understood why they might think there should be no contest this year." There was a long pause. But I said to them, "No." An eruption of manic cheering. "No, no," screamed the crowd. Jezal was ushered into line along with the other contestants. 2 West, 8 pairs. He fussed with his steels as the Lord Chamberlain droned on, though he'd checked them 20 times already. "No," I said to them. "Should we allow these barbarians, these animals of the frozen north, to tread upon our way of life? Should we allow this beacon of freedom amidst the darkness of the world to be extinguished? No, I said to them. Our liberty is not for sale at any price. On this, my friends, my countrymen, my fellow citizens of the Union, on this you may depend. We will win this war." Another great ocean swell of approval. Jezal swallowed, glanced nervously around. Bremer Dan Gorst was standing there beside him. The big bastard had the temerity to wink, grinning as if he hadn't a care in the world. Grinning. "Damn idiot," whispered Jezal. But he took care that his lips didn't move. And so, my friends, and so came Hoff's final cries. What finer occasion could there be than when we stand upon the very brink of peril, to celebrate the skill, the strength, the prowess of some of our nation's bravest sons? My fellow citizens, my countrymen of the Union, I give you your contestants. The doors were heaved open, and the roar of the crowd beyond rushed into the hall and made the rafters ring. Suddenly, deafeningly loud, the front pair of swordsmen began to stride out through the bright archway, then the next pair, then the next. Jezal was sure he would freeze, motionless and staring like a rabbit, but when his turn came, his feet stepped off manfully next to Gorst's, the heels of his highly polished boots clicking across the tiled floor and through the high doorway. The square of marshals was transformed. All around, great banks of seating had been erected, stretching back and back, and up, and up, and up on all sides, spilling over with a boiling multitude. The contestants filed down a deep valley between the towering stands, towards the center of this great arena, the beams and struts, and tree trunk supports like a shadowy forest on either side. Directly before them, seeming very far away, the fencing circle had been laid, a little ring of dry yellow grass in the midst of a sea of faces. Down near the front Jezal could make out the features of the rich and noble, dressed in their best, shading their eyes from the bright sun, on the whole fashionably disinterested in the spectacle before them. Further back, higher up, the figures became less distinct, the clothes less fine. The vast majority of the crowd were mere blobs and specks of color, crammed in around the distant edge of the dizzying bowl. But the commoners made up for their distance with their excitement, cheering, shouting, standing up on their toes and waving, their arms in the air. Above them, the tops of the very highest buildings around the square peered over, walls and roofs sticking up like islands in the ocean, the windows and parapets crammed with minuscule onlookers. Jezal blinked at this great display of humanity. Part of him was aware that his mouth was hanging open, but too small a part to close it. Damn, he felt queasy. He knew he should have eaten something, but it was too late now. What if he puked right here in front of half the world? He felt that surge of blind panic again. Where did he leave his steels? Where were they? In his hand. In his hand. The crowd roared, and sighed, and wailed, with a myriad of different voices. The contestants began to move away from the circle. Not all of them would be fighting today. Most would only watch, as though there was a need for extra spectators. They began to make their way towards the front rows. But Jezal was not going with them. More was the pity. He made for the enclosures where the contestants prepared to fight. He flopped down heavily next to West, closed his eyes and wiped his sweaty forehead as the crowd cheered on. Everything was too bright, too loud, too overpowering. Marshal Varuz was nearby, leaning over the side of the enclosure to shout in someone's ear. Jezal stared across the arena at the occupants of the royal box opposite, hoping vainly for a distraction. "His Majesty the King seems to be enjoying the proceedings," whispered West in Jezal's ear. The king, in fact, appeared already to have fallen soundly asleep, his crown slipping off at an angle. Jezal wondered idly what would happen if it fell off. Crown Prince Ladisla was there, fabulously dressed as always, beaming around at the arena with an enormous smile, as though everyone was there for him. His younger brother, Prince Reno, could hardly have looked more different, plain and sober, frowning worriedly at his semi-conscious father. Their mother, the queen, sat beside them, bolt upright with her chin in the air, studiously pretending that her august husband was wide awake, and that his crown was in no danger of dropping suddenly and painfully into her lap. Between her and Lord Hoff, Jezal's eye was caught by a young woman very, very beautiful. She was even more expensively dressed than Ladisla, if that was possible, with a chain of huge diamonds round her neck, flashing bright in the sun. "Who's the woman?" asked Jezal. "Ah, the Princess Therese," murmured West. "The daughter of Grand Duke Orso, Lord of Talons. She's quite the celebrated beauty, and for once it seems that rumor doesn't exaggerate. I thought nothing good ever came from Talons." "So I've heard, but I think she might be the exception, don't you?" Jezal was not entirely convinced. Spectacular, no doubt, but there was an icy, proud look to her eye. "I think the queen has it in mind that she marry Prince Ladisla." As Jezal watched, the crown prince leant across his mother to favor the princess with some witless banter, then exploded into laughter at his own joke, slapping his knee with merriment. She gave a frosty little smile, radiating contempt even at this distance. Ladisla seemed not to notice, though, and Jezal's attention was soon distracted. A tall man in a red coat was striding ponderously towards the circle. "The referee. It's time," murmured West. The referee held up his arm with a theatrical flourish, 2 fingers extended, and turned slowly around, waiting for the hubbub to subside. "Today you will have the pleasure of witnessing 2 bouts of fencing," he thundered, then thrust up his other hand, 3 fingers out, as the audience applauded. "Each the best of 3 touches." He threw up both arms. 4 men will fight before you. 2 of them will go home, empty-handed." The referee let one arm drop, shook his head sadly. The crowd sighed, but 2 will pass on to the next round. The crowd bellowed their approval. "Ready?" asked Marshal Varuz, leaning forwards over Jezal's shoulder. What a damn fool question. What if he wasn't ready? What then? Call the whole one off. "Sorry everyone, I'm not ready. See you next year." But all Jezal could say was, The time has come, cried the referee, turning slowly around in the center of the arena. For our first bout. Jacket, snapped Varus. Jezal fumbled with the buttons and pulled his jacket off, rolling up his shirt sleeves mechanically. He glanced sideways and saw his opponent making similar preparations. A tall, thin young man with long arms and weak, slightly dewy eyes, hardly the most intimidating-looking of adversaries. Jezal noticed his hands were trembling slightly as he took his steels from his second. Trained by Septan Vissen and hailing from Rostad in Stericland, the referee paused for the greatest effect. Curtis Dan Broya. There was a wave of enthusiastic clapping. Jezal snorted. These clowns would clap for anyone. The tall young man got up from his seat and walked purposefully towards the circle, his steels flashing in the sunlight. Broya! Repeated the referee as the gangly idiot took his mark. West pulled Jezal's steels from their sheaths. The metallic ringing of the blades made him want to be sick again. The referee pointed once more towards the contestants' enclosure. And his opponent today, an officer of the King's Own, and trained by none other than Lord Marshal Varus. There was scattered applause, and the old soldier beamed happily, hailing from Luthar in Midderland but resident here in the Agrient. Captain Jezal Dan Luthar. Another surge of cheering, far louder than Broya had received. There was a flurry of sharp cries above the din, shouted numbers, odds being offered. Jezal felt another rush of nausea as he got slowly to his feet. Good luck. West handed Jezal his naked steels, hilts first. He doesn't need luck, snapped Varus. This Broya's a nobody. Just watch his reach. Press him, Jezal, press him. It seemed to take forever to reach that ring of short, dry grass, the sound of the crowd loud in Jezal's ears, but the sound of his heart louder still, turning the grips of his steels round and round in his sweaty palms. Luthar, repeated the referee, smiling wide as he watched Jezal approach. Pointless and irrelevant questions flitted in and out of his mind. Was Ardy watching, in the crowd, wondering whether he would come to meet her that night? Would he get killed in the war? How did they get the grass for the fencing circle into the square of marshals? He glanced up at Broya. Was he feeling the same way? The crowd was quiet now. Very quiet. The weight of the silence pressed down on Jezal as he took his mark in the circle, pushed his feet into the dry earth. Broya shrugged his shoulders, shook his head, raised his steels. Jezal needed to piss so badly. What if he pissed himself right now? A big dark stain spreading across his trousers. The man who pissed himself at the contest. He would never live it down, not if he lived 100 years. Begin, thundered the referee. But nothing happened. The two men stood there facing each other, steels at the ready. Jezal's eyebrow itched. He wanted to scratch it. But how? His opponent licked his lips, then took a cautious step to his left. Jezal did the same. They circled each other warily, shoes crunching gently on the dry grass, slowly drawing closer together. And as they came closer, Jezal's world contracted to the space between the points of their long steels. Now it was only a stride. Now it was a foot. Now just 6 inches separated them. Jezal's whole mind was focused on those 2 glittering points. 3 inches. Broya jabbed forward, weakly, and Jezal flicked it away without thinking. The blades rang gently together, and as though that were a signal prearranged with every person in the arena, the shouting began again. Scattered calls to begin with. Kill him, Luthar. Yes, jab, jab, jab. But soon dissolving once more into the rumbling, angry sea of the crowd, rising and falling with the movements in the circle. The more Jezal saw of this lanky idiot, the less daunted he became. His nerves began to subside. Broya jabbed, clumsy, and Jezal barely had to move. Broya cut without conviction, and Jezal parried without effort. Broya lunged, positively inept, off balance, and overextended. Jezal stepped around it and jabbed his opponent in the ribs with the blunt point of his long steel. It was all so very easy. One for Luthar, cried the referee, and a surge of cheering ran around the stands. Jezal smiled to himself, basking in the appreciation of the crowd. Varus had been right. This boob was nothing to worry about. One more touch, and he'd be through to the next round. He returned to his mark, and Broya did the same, rubbing his ribs with one hand and staring at Jezal balefully from beneath his brows. Jezal was not intimidated. "Angry looks are only any use if you can fight worth a damn. Begin." They closed quickly this time, and exchanged a cut or two. Jezal could hardly believe how slowly his opponent was moving. It was as if his swords weighed a ton each. Broya fished around in the air with his long steel, trying to use his reach to pin Jezal down. He had barely used his short steel yet, let alone coordinated the two. Worse still, he was starting to look out of breath, and they'd barely been fencing 2 minutes. Had he trained at all, this bumpkin, or had they simply made up the numbers with some servant off the street? Jezal jumped away, danced around his opponent. Broya flapped after him, dogged but incompetent. It was starting to become embarrassing. Nobody enjoys a mismatch, and this dunce's clumsiness was denying Jezal the opportunity to shine. "Oh, come on!" he shouted. A surge of laughter flowed around the stands. Broya gritted his teeth and came on with everything he had. But it wasn't much. Jezal swatted his feeble efforts aside, dodged around them, floated across the circle while his witless opponent lumbered after, always 3 steps behind. There was no precision, no speed, no thought. A few minutes before, Jezal had been half terrified by the prospect of fencing with this gangling fool. Now he was almost bored. "Ha!" he cried, switching suddenly onto the attack, catching his opponent off balance with a savage cut, sending him stumbling back. The crowd came alive, roaring their support. He jabbed and jabbed again. Broya blocked desperately, all off balance, reeled backwards, parried one last time, then tripped, his arms flailing, short steel flying out of his hand, and pitched out of the circle onto his arse. There was a wave of laughter, and Jezal could not help but join in. The poor dolt looked quite amusing, knocked on his back with his legs in the air like some sort of turtle. "Captain Luthar wins," roared the referee. 2-0. The laughter turned to jeering as Broya rolled over. He looked on the verge of tears, the oaf. Jezal stepped forwards and offered his hand, but found himself unable to entirely wipe the smirk off his face. His beaten adversary pointedly ignored his help, pushing himself up from the ground and giving him a look half hating, half hurt. Jezal shrugged pleasantly. "It's not my fault you're shit." "More?" asked Caspar, holding out the bottle in a wobbly hand, eyes misted over with too much booze. "No thanks." Jezal pushed the bottle gently away before Caspar had the chance to pour. He looked blearily bewildered for a moment. Then he turned to Jalenhorm. "More?" "Always." The big man slid his glass across the rough tabletop in a way that said, "I am not drunk," though he clearly was. Caspar lowered the bottle towards it, squinting at the glass as though it was a great distance away. Jezal watched the neck of the bottle wobbling in the air, then rattling on the edge of the glass. The inevitability of it was almost painful to behold. Wine spilled out across the table, splashing into Jalenhorm's lap. "You're drunk," complained the big man, staggering to his feet and brushing at himself with big drunken hands, knocking his stool over in the process. A few of the other patrons eyed their table with evident disdain. "Always," giggled Caspar. West looked up briefly from his glass. "You're both drunk. Not our fault." Jalenhorm groped for his stool. "It's him." He pointed an unsteady finger at Jezal. "Have on," gurgled Caspar. "You won, didn't you? And now we got to celebrate." Jezal wished they didn't have to celebrate quite so much. It was becoming embarrassing. My cousin Aris were there, saw a whole thing. She was very impressed. Caspar flung his arm round Jezal's shoulder. "Think she's quite schmitten with you." "Schmitten." "Schmitten," he worked his wet lips in Jezal's face, trying to get his mouth round the word. "She's very rich, you know." "Very rich indeed." "Schmitten." Jezal wrinkled his nose. He had not the slightest interest in that ghostly simpleton of a cousin, however rich he was. And Caspar's breath stank. "Good. Lovely." He disentangled himself from the lieutenant and shoved him away, none too gently. "So, when are we starting on this business in the north?" demanded Brent, a little too loud, as though he for one couldn't wait to get underway. "Soon, I hope, home before winter." "Eh, Major?" "Who?" snorted West, frowning to himself. "We'll be lucky to have left before winter. The rate we're going." Brent looked a little taken aback. "Well, I'm sure we'll give these savages a thrashing whenever we get there." Give him a thrashing, cried Caspar. Aye. Jallenhorn nodded his agreement. West was not in the mood. I wouldn't be too sure about that. Have you seen the state of some of these levies? They can hardly walk, let alone fight. It's a disgrace. Jallenhorn dismissed all this with an angry wave of his hand. They're nothing but fucking savages, the lot of 'em. We'll knock 'em on their arses like Jezal did that idiot today, eh? Jezal. Home before winter, everyone says so. Do you know the land up there? Asked West, leaning across the table. Forests, mountains, rivers, on and on. Precious little open space to fight in, precious few roads to march on. You've got to catch a man before the thrashing can start. Home before winter. Next winter, maybe, if we come back at all. Brent's eyes were wide open and horrified. You can't mean that. No, you're right. West sighed and shook himself. I'm sure it'll all turn out fine. Glory and promotions all round. Home before winter. I'd take a coat with you, though, just in case. An uneasy silence descended on the group. West had that hard frown on his face that he got sometimes. The frown that said they'd get no more fun out of him tonight. Brent and Jallenhorn looked puzzled and surly. Only Caspar maintained his good humor, and he was lolling back in his chair, eyes half closed, blissfully unaware of his surroundings. Some celebration. Jezal himself felt tired, annoyed, and worried. Worried about the contest, worried about the war, worried about RD. The letter was still there, folded up in his pocket. He glanced sidelong at West, then quickly away. Damn, he felt guilty. He had never really felt guilty before, and he didn't like it one bit. If he didn't meet her, he would feel guilty for leaving her on her own. If he did, he'd feel guilty for breaking his word to West. It was a dilemma, all right. Jezal chewed at his thumbnail. What the hell was it about this damn family? Well, said West sharply, I have to be going. Early start tomorrow, muttered Brent. Right, said Jallenhorn. West looked Jezal right in the eye. Can I have a word? His expression was serious, grave, angry even. Jezal's heart lurched. What if West had found out about the letter? What if RD had told him? The major turned away, moved over towards a quiet corner. Jezal stared around, desperately seeking for some way out. Jezal! Called West. Yes, yes! He got up with the greatest reluctance and followed his friend, flashing what he hoped was an innocent-seeming smile. Perhaps it was something else. Nothing to do with RD. Please let it be something else. I don't want anyone else to know about this. West looked round to make sure no one was watching. Jezal swallowed. Any moment now he would get a punch in the face. At least one. He had never been punched in the face, not properly. A girl slapped him pretty hard once, but that was hardly the same. He prepared himself as best he could, gritting his teeth, wincing slightly. Burr has set a date. We've got 4 weeks. Jezal stared back. What? Until we embark? Embark? For England? Jezal? Oh yes. England, of course. 4 weeks, you say? I thought you ought to know since you're busy with the contest so you'd have time to get ready. Keep it to yourself, though. Yes, of course. Jezal wiped his sweaty forehead. You all right? You look pale. You look pale. I'm fine. Fine. He took a deep breath. All this excitement, you know, the fencing and everything. Don't worry, you did well today. West clapped him on the shoulder. But there's a lot more to do. 3 more bouts before you can call yourself a champion, and they'll only get harder. Don't get lazy, Jezal, and don't get too drunk. He threw over his shoulder as he made for the door. Jezal breathed a long sigh of relief as he returned to the table where the others were sitting. His nose was still intact. Brent had already started to complain. Now he could see that West wasn't coming back. What the hell was all that? He asked, frowning and jabbing his thumb at the door. I mean to say, well, I know he's supposed to be the big hero and all of that. But, well, I mean to say, Jezal stared down at him. What do you mean to say? Well, to talk that way. It's defeatist. The drink was lending him courage now, and he was warming to his topic. Well, I mean to say, it's cowardly talk is what it is. Now, look here, Brent snapped Jezal. He fought in 3 pitched battles, and he was first through the breach at Ulriach. He may not be a nobleman, but he's a damn courageous fellow. Added to that, he knows soldiering, he knows Marshal Burr, and he knows England. What do you know, Brent? Jezal curled his lip. Except how to lose at cards and empty a wine bottle. That's all a man needs to know in my book, laughed Jezal nervously, doing his best to calm the situation. More wine, he bellowed at no one in particular. Jezal dropped down on his stool. If the company had been subdued before West left, it was even more so now. Brint was sulking. Jalen was swaying on his stool. Caspar had fallen soundly asleep, sprawled out on the wet tabletop, his breathing making quiet slurping sounds. Jezal drained his wineglass and stared round at the unpromising faces. Damn, he was bored. It was a fact. He was only now beginning to realize that the conversation of the drunk is only interesting to the drunk. A few glasses of wine can be the difference between finding a man a hilarious companion or an insufferable moron. He wondered if he himself was as tedious drunk as Caspar, or Jalen or Brint. Jezal gave a thin smile as he looked over at the sulking bastard. If he were king, he mused, he would punish poor conversation with death, or at least a lengthy prison term. He stood up from his chair. Jalen stared up at him. What you doing? Better get some rest, snapped Jezal. Need to train tomorrow? It was the most he could do not to just run out of the place. But you won. Ain't you going to celebrate? First round. I've still 3 more men to beat, and they'll all be better than that oaf today. Jezal took his coat from the back of the chair and pulled it over his shoulders. Suit self, said Jalen, then slurped noisily from his glass. Caspar raised his head from the table for a moment, hair on one side plastered to his skull with spilled wine. Going Shoshunen? Said Jezal as he turned and stalked out. There was a cold wind blowing in the street outside. It made him feel even more sober than before, painfully sober. He badly needed some intelligent company, but where could he find it at this time of night? There was only one place he could think of. He slipped the letter out of his pocket and read it in the dim light from the tavern's windows. Just one more time. If he hurried, he might still catch her. He began to walk slowly towards the 4 corners. Just to talk, that was all. He needed someone to talk to. No. He forced himself to stop. Could he truly pretend that he wanted to be her friend? A friendship between a man and a woman was what you called it, when one had been pursuing the other for a long time, and had never got anywhere. What then? Marriage? To a girl with no blood and no money? Unthinkable. He imagined bringing Artie home to meet his family. Here is my new wife. Father, wife, and her connections are... He shuddered at the thought. But what if they could find something in between, where everyone would be comfortable? His feet began slowly to move. Not friendship, not marriage, but some loser arrangement. He strode down the road towards the 4 corners. They could meet discreetly, and talk, and laugh. Somewhere with a bed, maybe. No. Jezal stopped again and slapped the side of his head in frustration. He couldn't let that happen, even supposing she would. West was one thing, but what if other people found out? It wouldn't hurt his reputation any, of course. But hers would be ruined. His flesh crept at the thought. She didn't deserve that, surely. It wasn't good enough to say it was her problem. Not good enough. Just so he could have a little fun. The selfishness of it. He was amazed that it had never occurred to him before. So he had reasoned himself into a corner then. Just as he had done 10 times already today. They would be away to war soon anyway. And that would put an end to his ridiculous pining. Home to bed then, and train all day tomorrow. Train and train until Marshal Varus had battered her out of his thoughts. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, turned, and set off towards the Agrient. The statue of Harad the Great loomed out of the darkness on a marble plinth almost as tall as Jezal, seeming far too big and grand for its quiet little square near the 4 corners. He had been jumping at shadows all the way here, avoiding people, doing his best to be inconspicuous. There weren't many people around, though. It was late, and most likely Arde would have given up waiting a long time ago, provided she was even there to begin with. He crept nervously around the statue, peering into the shadows, feeling an absolute fool. He had walked through this square many times before and never given it a second thought. Was it not a public space after all? He had as much right as anyone to be here, but somehow he still felt like a thief. The square was empty. That was a good thing, all for the best. There was nothing to gain, everything to lose, and so forth. So why did he feel so completely crushed? He stared up at Harad's face, locked into that stony frown that sculptors reserve for the truly great. He had a fine, strong jaw, did Harrod, almost the equal of Jezal's own. "Wake up!" hissed a voice by his ear. Jezal let vent to a girlish squeal, scrambled away, tripped, only stayed upright by clawing at King Herod's enormous foot. "No need to piss yourself, RD." She pushed back her hood. Light from a window slanted across the bottom part of her face, catching her lopsided smile. "It's only me." "I didn't see you," he mumbled pointlessly, quickly releasing his desperate grip on the huge stone foot and doing his best to appear at ease. He had to admit it was a poor start. He had no talent for this cloak and dagger business. Our day seemed quite comfortable, though. It made him wonder whether she hadn't done it all before. "You've been pretty hard to see yourself lately," she said. "Well, he muttered, heart still thumping from the shock. "I've been busy, what with the contest and all." "Ah, the all-important contest. I saw you fight today." "You did? Very impressive." Thank you. My brother said something, didn't he?" "What, about fencing?" "No, numbskull. About me." Jezal paused, trying to work out the best way to answer that one. "Well, are you scared of him?" "No." "Silence. All right, yes. But you came anyway. I suppose I should be flattered." She walked slowly around him, looking him up and down, from feet to forehead and back again. "You took your time, though. It's late. I'll have to be getting home soon." There was something about the way she was looking at him which was not helping to calm his thumping heart. Quite the opposite. He had to tell her that he could not see her any more. It was the wrong thing to do, for both of them. Nothing good could come from it. Nothing good. He was breathing quick, tense, excited, unable to take his eyes away from her shadowy face. He had to tell her now. Wasn't that why he came? He opened his mouth to speak, but the arguments all seemed a long way away now. Applying at a different time and to different people, intangible and weightless. "Ade," he began. "Hmm?" She stepped towards him, head cocked on one side. Jezal tried to move away, but the statue was at his back. She came closer still, lips slightly parted, her eyes fixed on his mouth. What was so wrong in it anyway? Closer still, her face turned up towards his. He could smell her, his head was full of the scent of her. He could feel her warm breath on his cheek. What could be wrong with this? Her fingertips were cold against his skin, brushing the side of his face, tracing the line of his jaw, curling through his hair and pulling his head down towards her. Her lips touched his cheek, soft and warm, then his chin, then his mouth. They sucked gently at his. She pressed herself up against him, her other hand slipped round his back. Her tongue lapped at his gums, at his teeth, at his tongue, and she made little sounds in her throat. So did he. Perhaps he really wasn't sure. His whole body was tingling, hot and cold at once. His mind was in his mouth. It was as if he'd never kissed a girl before. What could be wrong with this? Her teeth nipped at his lips, almost painful, but not quite. He opened his eyes, breathless, trembling, weak at the knees. She was looking up at him. He could see her eyes gleaming in the darkness, watching him carefully, studying him. "RD, what? When can I see you again?" His throat was dry. His voice sounded hoarse. She looked down at the ground with a little smile. A cruel smile, as though she'd called his bluff and won a pile of money from him. He didn't care. "When?" "Oh, I'll let you know." He had to kiss her again. Shit on the consequences. Fuck West. Damn it all. He bent down towards her, closed his eyes. No. She pushed his mouth away from hers. "You should have come sooner." She broke away from him and turned around, with a smile still on her lips, and walked slowly away. He watched her, silent, frozen, fascinated, his back against the cold stone base of the statue. He had never felt like this before. Not ever. She glanced back, just once, as if to check that he was still watching. His chest constricted, almost painfully, just to see her look at him. Then she rounded a corner and was gone. He stood there for a moment, his eyes wide open, just breathing. Then a cold gust of wind blew through the square and the world pressed back in upon him. Fencing, the war, his friend West, his obligations. One kiss, that was all. One kiss. And his resolve had leaked away like piss from a broken chamber pot. He stared around, suddenly guilty, confused, and scared. What had he done here? Shit, he said. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.